Everyone laughed when she reached for the crippled girl's hand. But when they began to dance, the millionaire in the crowd broke down in tears and whispered, "That's her." Welcome back, my amazing family and friends. If you're ready to dive into this unforgettable story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll bring you another incredible tale you absolutely can't miss. Let's get started, and don't forget to like and share to help our community grow. The spring air in Asheville, North Carolina carried the scent of dogwood blossoms through the open windows of Jefferson High School, but inside the gymnasium, all Naomi Carter could smell was floor polish and teenage anxiety. She stood at the entrance, her dark fingers wrapped around the strap of her worn canvas bag, taking in the chaos of prom committee preparations with the same quiet observation that had become her signature. "Miss Carter." Principal Henderson's voice cut through the cacophony of scraping chairs and arguing teenagers. "Thank goodness you're here. This event is 3 weeks away and we're nowhere near ready." Naomi offered a small smile, the kind that reached her eyes and made people feel seen. At 28, she'd been teaching adaptive physical education at Jefferson for only 2 years, but she'd already earned a reputation. The teacher who noticed the invisible kids, who remembered names, who stayed late. "We'll get there, Principal Henderson," she said, her voice carrying the gentle certainty of someone who'd learned early that hope was a choice you made every single day. She moved through the gymnasium with practiced ease, her sneakers silent on the glossy floor. Streamers hung at drunken angles from the basketball hoops. A student-painted banner declaring a night to remember was spread across 3 lunch tables, the letters bleeding where someone had used too much paint. And everywhere, were the students, the ones who belonged, whose laughter came easy, whose bodies moved through the world like it had been built for them. Which is why Naomi saw her immediately. The girl sat on the bottom bleacher, so far to the left she was almost behind the folded divider wall. 13, maybe 14, with skin the color of warm honey and hair pulled back in a ponytail that had started neat but was now coming undone. Her left leg was encased in a brace, the kind that wrapped from ankle to mid-thigh, metal rods glinting under the fluorescent lights. She wasn't watching the preparations. She was watching her hands, which were folded in her lap with the careful stillness of someone trying to take up less space. Naomi had seen that stillness before. Had lived it. Once upon a time. "That's Isabella Torres," a voice said beside her. Naomi turned to find Brian Richmond, the music teacher, holding a speaker cable and wearing the exhausted expression of someone who'd been volunteered for too many committees. "Just transferred here last month. Some kind of car accident, I heard. Messed up her leg pretty bad." "Why is she here?" Naomi asked, though she already knew the answer. It was written in the way Isabella's eyes would flick up occasionally, watching the other students dance, then drop quickly back to her hands. Brian shrugged. "Volunteer credit. Probably. School requires 50 hours for graduation. She's helping with the sign-in table, I think." He paused, then added quietly, "The other kids, they don't really know what to do with her, you know? It's not mean-spirited. They're just scared," Naomi finished. "Scared that whatever she has might be contagious. Scared that if they get too close, they might catch the bad luck." She said it without bitterness. Just fact. Or worse, scared they might have to actually think about someone besides themselves. She walked toward Isabella before Brian could respond. The girl didn't look up until Naomi's shadow fell across her lap. When she did, her eyes went wide, not with hope, but with the defensive wariness of someone who'd learned that attention usually meant trouble. "Hi," Naomi said simply. "I'm Miss Carter. I don't think we've met yet." "Isabella." The girl's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm waiting for Mrs. Patterson. She said she'd tell me what to do." Mrs. Patterson is coordinating the decorations, and knowing her, she'll be another 20 minutes. Naomi sat down on the bleacher beside Isabella, close enough to be companionable, far enough to respect boundaries. "So, you've got some time. Can I ask you something?" Isabella's shoulders tensed. "Okay. Do you like to dance?" The question hung in the air between them. Across the gymnasium, someone dropped a box of paper plates, and laughter erupted. The sound seemed very far away. "I can't," Isabella said finally. "My leg." "I didn't ask if you could," Naomi said gently. "I asked if you liked to." Isabella's eyes finally met hers, and Naomi saw something flicker there, something that might have been hunger, or grief, or both. "I used to. Before. Before the accident. A nod. I took ballet, jazz, even hip-hop. Her voice got smaller. I was going to audition for the dance team here. That's why we moved to Asheville. My mom got a job, and I was going to, but then the accident happened, and now. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Naomi looked out at the gymnasium floor, at the students moving around with the unconscious grace of people who'd never had to think about how their bodies moved through space. She thought about her own journey, the scholarship to Davidson College that she'd almost turned down because she didn't think she belonged, the master's degree in adaptive education that she'd earned while working 2 jobs, the daily choice to believe that her presence mattered. Can I tell you something, Isabella? Naomi said. Dancing isn't about the steps. It's about the music in your chest, the feeling that makes you want to move. That doesn't disappear just because your body changes. It just finds new ways to express itself. Isabella's jaw tightened. That's what my therapist says. That I need to find new ways to adapt. She made air quotes with her fingers, and there was an edge to her voice now, the first sign of the fire beneath the resignation. But it's not the same. It's never going to be the same. No, Naomi agreed. It's not. And that's the hardest truth, isn't it? That some things break and don't go back to how they were. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But that doesn't mean they can't be beautiful in new ways. Before Isabella could respond, a sharp voice cut across the gymnasium. Miss Carter, we need you over here. Naomi stood, but she rested her hand briefly on Isabella's shoulder. Think about what I said, okay? And Isabella. She waited until the girl looked up. You're not invisible to me. I see you. She walked away then, back into the organized chaos of prom preparations, leaving Isabella on the bleacher with something she hadn't felt in months, a tiny spark of something that might have been possibility. What Naomi didn't see was the man who just entered through the side gymnasium door, the one that led directly from the administrative offices. Grant Morrison stood just inside the entrance, dressed in charcoal slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, a concession to the casual nature of school visits, though everything else about him screamed boardroom. At 47, he carried himself with the particular confidence of someone who'd built an empire from nothing and never forgotten how to fight. He was here for the check presentation. Morrison Technology Solutions had donated $50,000 for the school's new computer lab, and Principal Henderson had insisted on making it a whole production. Grant had tried to decline, to just wire the money and be done with it, but his PR team had convinced him otherwise. Community engagement, they'd said. Local philanthropist returns to his roots. The usual corporate theater. But now, standing in the doorway of the gymnasium, he found himself frozen. It was the bleachers. The bottom row, left side. That exact spot where a girl with a leg brace sat alone, her head down, trying to disappear. Grant's hand moved unconsciously to his chest, pressing against the place where memory had become a physical ache. 23 years. It had been 23 years since he'd sat in those exact bleachers, 13 years old and reeling from the diagnosis. Muscular dystrophy, progressive, degenerative. They'd given him odds and outcomes, none of them good. And for 2 years, he'd sat on that bleacher, watching the other kids play sports he'd never play, dance at events he'd never attend, live lives that felt impossibly distant. Until a teacher had noticed him. Mr. Lawson, who taught adaptive PE before it was even called that, who dragged a reluctant, angry boy into the pool and taught him that strong came in different forms. Grant blinked hard, pulling himself back to the present. The girl on the bleacher wasn't him. Her story wasn't his story. He'd gotten lucky. The diagnosis had been wrong, a misread test, a 1 in a million mistake that revealed itself when his symptoms stopped progressing. He'd gone on to play college tennis, to build a tech company, to live the life he'd thought was impossible. But some part of him had never left that bleacher. Mr. Morrison. Principal Henderson materialized at his elbow, all professional enthusiasm. Thank you so much for coming. We've set up in the library for the presentation, much better lighting for photos. If you'll just follow me. Grant let himself be guided away, but his eyes found the girl one more time. And then they found the woman who'd been sitting beside her, the teacher with the kind eyes and the careful way of moving, like she understood something about being overlooked. He filed the image away, not knowing yet why it mattered. Not knowing that in 3 weeks, everything would change. The gymnasium had gone quiet in the way that spaces do when something shifts, when the air itself seems to be holding its breath. Have you ever been the one sitting alone, hoping someone would see you? Or have you been the one who walked across that invisible line to reach out? Drop a comment below and share your story, because sometimes, knowing we're not alone is the first step toward finding our courage. The 3 weeks between that first gymnasium meeting and prom night moved like water, sometimes rushing, sometimes still, but always flowing toward something inevitable. Naomi found reasons to check in with Isabella. Not obviously, not in a way that would draw attention or make the girl feel like a project. Just presence. A smile in the hallway. A question about her history homework. An invitation to help set up equipment in the adaptive PE room, where Isabella's eyes would linger on the specialized exercise bikes and the parallel bars with an expression Naomi recognized, longing mixed with fear. You could try it, you know, Naomi said one afternoon, nodding toward the equipment. The physical therapist cleared you for low-impact activities, right? Isabella had shaken her head. Too quick, too defensive. I don't want to. It's not the same. No, Naomi agreed. It's not. But maybe that's okay. She didn't push. Pushing never worked with kids like Isabella. Kids who'd had too many people telling them what they should feel, how they should adapt, what their new normal should look like. They needed space to arrive at their own conclusions, and someone steady enough to wait while they did. What Naomi didn't know was that Isabella watched her. The way she moved through the school with quiet authority, the way she spoke to every student like they mattered, the way she'd stop to pick up dropped books or stay late to help a struggling athlete with their college applications. Isabella watched, and something in her chest, something that had felt dead since the accident, began to flutter weakly, like a bird testing broken wings. Grant Morrison, meanwhile, tried to forget about the gymnasium and the girl on the bleachers. He had a company to run, board meetings to attend, a new AI division that was hemorrhaging money and brilliant engineers in equal measure. His days were filled with the kind of problems that could be solved with enough intelligence, capital, and strategic thinking. But at night, when the penthouse apartment went quiet and the city lights of Charlotte glittered below his windows like fallen stars, his mind would drift back. To that bleacher. To the way the girl had held herself so carefully still. To the teacher who'd sat beside her with the patient grace of someone who understood that some loneliness couldn't be fixed with words alone. He'd made a call to Principal Henderson the week after the check presentation. Casual. Just following up. That prom you're planning, how's it coming together? Wonderfully. Thanks to your generous donation. The computer lab is already making such a difference. And I was thinking, Grant interrupted, then softened his tone. I'd like to sponsor the prom. Completely. Venue, catering, decorations, DJ, whatever you need. No strings attached. The principal had been stunned into momentary silence. Mr. Morrison, that's incredibly generous. May I ask what prompted this? Grant had looked out his office window at the skyline, at the empire he'd built. Let's call it nostalgia. I remember my high school years. I remember what it felt like to be on the outside. If I can give these kids one perfect night, why not? What he didn't say was that he'd already decided to attend. That he'd marked the date in his calendar with the kind of attention he usually reserved for merger negotiations. That something about that gymnasium had hooked into his chest and wouldn't let go. The money had transformed everything. Suddenly, Jefferson High's prom wasn't just a school dance in a decorated gymnasium, it was an event. The venue moved to the Grove Park Inn, one of Asheville's most elegant hotels, with its sprawling ballroom and mountain views. The decorations went from crepe paper to professional lighting design. The playlist expanded to include a live band for the first hour. And through it all, Naomi watched Isabella retreat further into herself. I'm not going, the girl announced 1 week before prom, standing in the doorway of Naomi's office with her arms crossed. I know I'm supposed to volunteer, but I'll find another way to get the credit hours. Naomi looked up from the stack of permission slips she'd been reviewing. Okay. Isabella blinked. Okay? That's it. You're 14, Isabella. Prom isn't really for freshmen anyway. Naomi kept her voice neutral, matter-of-fact. Though I heard they're going to have the most amazing dessert bar. And that band they hired does this incredible cover of. I don't care about dessert or music, Isabella cut in, and there was real anger in her voice now, hot and raw. I care that everyone will be dancing, and I'll be sitting at some stupid sign-in table watching them, and they'll all be thinking that's the girl who can't dance anymore. That's who I am now. The girl who can't. Naomi set down her pen. Is that who you think you are? It's who everyone else thinks I am. Everyone? Naomi asked gently. Or just you? The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading out in silence. Isabella's jaw worked, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You don't understand. You're right, Naomi said. I don't understand exactly what you're going through. But I understand what it feels like to be defined by what other people see when they look at you. By what you think they see. She paused. I also understand that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is show up anyway. Isabella left without responding, but Naomi saw the way her shoulders shook as she walked away, and she knew the conversation had landed somewhere deep. 3 days before prom, Naomi made a decision. She found Isabella in the library during study hall, hunched over a Spanish textbook with the glazed expression of someone whose mind was miles away. Naomi slid into the chair across from her. I have a proposition, she said. Isabella looked up warily. What kind of proposition? Come to prom. Not as a volunteer, as my guest. As a dancer. The girl's face went through a series of expressions too quick to catalogue, landing finally on something like disbelief. Miss Carter, I can't dance. We've been through this. You can't dance the way you used to, Naomi corrected. But I know, that you can dance in new ways. If you'll trust me. If you'll try. Try what? Naomi pulled out her phone, scrolled to a video, and turned it around. On the screen, a woman in a wheelchair and her partner moved across a dance floor in perfect synchronization, the wheelchair spinning and gliding like it was part of the choreography, not a limitation but an extension of the art. Isabella watched in silence, her eyes fixed on the screen even after the video ended. Adaptive dance, Naomi said quietly. It's a whole discipline. And yes, I know you don't use a wheelchair, but the principle is the same. We work with your body as it is now, not as it was. We find the movement that feels good, that expresses what you want to say. She leaned forward. Isabella, you told me the music is still in your chest. Let's find a way to let it out. I don't know, Isabella whispered, but there was something different in her voice now. Something that wasn't quite hope but wasn't quite despair either. We have 3 days, Naomi said. Give me 3 days. If you hate it, if it feels wrong, you never have to think about it again. But if there's even a chance. She let the sentence hang. Isabella's hand moved unconsciously to her leg brace, fingers tracing the metal rods. Then she looked up, met Naomi's eyes, and gave the smallest nod. 3 days, she agreed. Prom night arrived with a kind of perfect spring weather that felt like a gift, warm enough for bare shoulders, cool enough that the mountain breeze carried the scent of honeysuckle and newly cut grass. The Grove parking glowed like a jewel box, its stone facade lit with soft gold lights, its ballroom transformed into something from a dream. Grant Morrison arrived early, before the students, because that's what sponsors did. He wore a tuxedo because the event coordinator had suggested it, and he felt ridiculous, overdressed and out of place, a 47-year-old man at a high school dance. But he'd committed, and he'd learned long ago that you didn't back out once you'd given your word. Principal Henderson found him near the ballroom entrance, looking uncomfortable and distinguished in equal measure. Mr. Morrison, you didn't have to come, truly. Your generosity has already made this night possible. I wanted to see it, Grant said simply, and it was true, even if he couldn't fully articulate why. To see them enjoy it. The students began arriving in clusters, girls in dresses that shimmered under the ballroom lights, boys in rented tuxedos that didn't quite fit, everyone radiating the particular electricity of youth on the edge of something new. Grant stationed himself in the shadows near the back of the ballroom, watching. The band started playing at 8. By 8:15, the dance floor was a riot of motion and laughter, teenagers moving with the unself-conscious joy of people who'd never had to question whether their bodies would do what they asked. Grant felt the old ache in his chest, the one that had nothing to do with his misdiagnosed condition and everything to do with memory. He was about to leave. This had been a mistake, indulging in nostalgia, trying to recapture something that was never his to begin with, when the music changed. The band transitioned to something slower, jazzier. A spotlight swept across the dance floor, and the crowd parted. And there, at the edge of the polished hardwood, stood Naomi Carter. She wore a simple dress the color of deep sapphire, elegant and understated, and she was holding out her hand to Isabella Torres. The gymnasium went quiet in that way that large spaces do when something shifts, when the air itself seems to hold its breath. Grant watched, his feet rooted to the floor, as the girl in the leg brace stared at that outstretched hand with an expression of pure terror. "I can't," Isabella whispered, but the microphone on the bandleader's stand caught it, amplified it, sent it rippling through the sudden silence. "You can," Naomi said, her voice clear and steady and full of a certainty that seemed to fill the entire ballroom. "We practiced. You know the moves. But more than that," she stepped closer, her hand still extended. "You deserve this. You deserve to feel the music. You deserve to take up space. You deserve to be seen not as the girl who can't, but as the girl who does." The silence stretched. Grant could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the collective held breath of 300 teenagers watching this moment unfold. And then Isabella reached out. Her hand trembled as it closed around Naomi's. She stood, her weight careful on her braced leg, her other hand finding Naomi's shoulder. The crowd remained frozen, watching. The music started again, and they began to move. It wasn't traditional dancing. Isabella couldn't pivot the way the other dancers couldn't put weight on both legs equally. But Naomi had choreographed around that, had created something new, a movement that used Isabella's good leg as an anchor, that incorporated the brace as part of the visual line, that turned limitation into style. They moved in small circles, Naomi leading with gentle pressure, Isabella following with increasing confidence. And then something remarkable happened. Isabella smiled. Not a small smile, not a careful smile, but a real, blazing expression of pure joy. The music swelled. Naomi spun Isabella carefully, using momentum and balance instead of footwork, and the girl's dress flared out like flower petals. When they came back together, Isabella was laughing, a sound so bright and unexpected that it seemed to break whatever spell had held the crowd frozen. Someone started clapping. Then someone else. Then the entire ballroom erupted in applause so thunderous that it drowned out the band. Grant Morrison stood in the shadows with tears streaming down his face. He wasn't crying for Isabella, though her courage had cracked something open in his chest. He wasn't crying for Naomi, though her compassion had reminded him of Mr. Lawson, of the teacher who'd saved him decades ago. He was crying for the boy he'd been. The 13-year-old on the bleachers who'd thought his life was over, who'd been so certain that different meant broken. He was crying for all the years he'd spent building walls around that old pain, pretending it didn't exist, throwing money at problems instead of allowing himself to feel. And he was crying because in this moment, watching a teacher dance with a student everyone else had learned not to see, he remembered what it felt like to be saved by someone's simple, radical act of witness. The song ended. Isabella and Naomi stood in the center of the dance floor, breathing hard, both of them smiling. The applause continued, deafening and beautiful. And then something else happened, something even Grant, with all his strategic thinking and pattern recognition, couldn't have predicted. A girl stepped forward from the crowd. Junior, from the look of her, pretty in a conventional way, wearing a pink dress that probably cost more than Naomi's entire outfit. She walked up to Isabella with measured steps. "That was really cool," she said, and there was genuine admiration in her voice. Would you want to dance? Like, with the group? We could make space for you." Isabella's eyes went wide. She looked at Naomi, who nodded encouragingly. "Okay," Isabella breathed. "Yeah, okay." The music shifted to something upbeat, contemporary. The dance floor filled again, but this time Isabella was in the middle of it, moving in her own way, and the other students adjusted around her, not pitying her, not being careful with her, but simply including her. Naomi stepped back to the edge of the floor, her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes bright with tears she wouldn't let fall in front of the students. This was what she'd hoped for but hadn't dared expect, not just acceptance, but belonging. Grant found himself moving before he'd made a conscious decision to do so. He crossed the ballroom, weaving through clusters of chaperones and parents, until he stood beside Naomi. "That was extraordinary," he said. She turned, surprised, and he saw her register his presence. Expensive tuxedo, unfamiliar face, the subtle markers of wealth and influence. Her expression shifted, became more guarded. "She did all the hard work," Naomi said. "I just gave her permission to try." "No." Grant shook his head, his eyes still on the dance floor where Isabella was laughing, really laughing, surrounded by other students. "You gave her something much more valuable than permission. You gave her witness. You saw her when everyone else had learned not to." Naomi studied him more carefully now, and Grant wondered what she saw. Did she recognize him from the check presentation? Did she notice the way his voice had gone rough, the way he was fighting to keep his composure? "You're Grant Morrison," she said finally. "The tech guy. You sponsored this." "I did." "Why?" The question was direct, unadorned. Grant appreciated that. No small talk, no politeness for its own sake. Just honest curiosity. "Because 23 years ago, I sat on a bleacher in a gymnasium not unlike the one at Jefferson, and I was convinced my life was over." He said it simply, the truth he rarely told. "I'd been diagnosed with a degenerative condition. I was 13, angry, and certain that I'd never be normal. Never play sports, never dance, never do any of the things that defined belonging in high school." Naomi's expression softened. "What changed?" "A teacher noticed me. Pulled me into adaptive PE. Taught me that strong came in different forms. Turned out my diagnosis was wrong, medical error, but by the time we figured that out, he'd already saved my life. Not my body, but my sense of possibility." Grant paused, watching Isabella spin carefully on her good leg, supported by the circle of students around her. "When I saw that girl on the bleachers 3 weeks ago, I saw myself. And tonight, watching you dance with her." He had to stop, had to breathe through the emotion closing his throat. "You reminded me what it looks like when someone chooses to see. When someone decides that another person's dignity matters more than their own comfort." They stood in silence for a moment, two adults at the edge of a teenage celebration, both carrying their own histories of pain and resilience. "She almost didn't come tonight," Naomi said quietly. "She was so scared. Scared of being pitied, scared of being stared at, scared of confirming everyone's worst assumptions about what she could and couldn't do. But she came anyway." "She came anyway," Naomi agreed. Because somewhere under all that fear, she remembered what it felt like to dance. To move for the joy of it. And she wanted that feeling back badly enough to risk the fear. Grant turned to face her fully. "Miss Carter." "Naomi. Please." "Naomi." He corrected himself. "What you did tonight, that kind of courage, that kind of compassion, it's rare. Rarer than you might think." He hesitated, then decided to take his own risk. "My company has a foundation. We focus on accessibility initiatives, educational programs, adaptive technology. I'd like to talk with you about expanding what you're doing here. Not just one student, one moment, but systematically. Resources, training, equipment, whatever you need to reach more kids like Isabella." Naomi's eyes widened. "Mr. Morrison." "Grant." "Grant." She studied him, and he could see her brilliant mind working behind those thoughtful eyes, assessing, evaluating. "That's incredibly generous. But I need you to understand something. I don't do this for recognition. I don't do it for funding, though God knows the program could use it. I do it because I remember what it felt like to be invisible. To walk into rooms and have people look through me instead of at me. And I decided a long time ago that I would spend my life making sure other people didn't feel that way." "I know," Grant said. "That's exactly why I want to help." Before Naomi could respond, a commotion near the dance floor drew their attention. Isabella had broken away from the group and was making her way toward them, her face flushed with exertion and joy, her leg brace clicking slightly with each step. "Miss Carter." She was breathless, her eyes bright. Did you see me dance?" "I saw everything," Naomi said, and there was so much love in her voice that Grant felt like an intruder on an intimate moment. "You were magnificent." "I was scared," Isabella admitted. "Like, really scared. But then the music started and I just let myself feel it. Like you said. And it was different than before, but it was still." She struggled for the word. "Beautiful," Grant supplied quietly. Isabella turned to him, seeming to notice him for the first time. "Yeah," she said. "It was still beautiful." The band struck up another song, and someone called Isabella's name from the dance floor. She hesitated, looking between Naomi and Grant. "Go," Naomi encouraged. "Dance while you can. The night's still young." Isabella grinned, a full, unguarded expression that transformed her entire face, and hurried back toward the crowd. They watched her go, this girl who'd been invisible just hours ago, now surrounded by peers who saw her not as a problem to solve but as a person to include. "You changed her life tonight," Grant said. Naomi shook her head. "No. I just reminded her that she had a life worth living. The changing, that was all her." Grant pulled a business card from his jacket pocket. "Will you call me? So we can talk about the foundation, about expanding the program." Naomi took the card, her fingers brushing his briefly. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask." The night continued around them, music and laughter, the swirl of dresses and the click of dress shoes on polished floors. But Grant stood rooted to his spot, watching Isabella dance, watching Naomi watch her with such fierce pride, and feeling something shift in his chest. He'd spent 23 years building an empire. He'd made his fortune, earned his success, proven that the boy on the bleachers could become someone who mattered. But tonight, watching one teacher refuse to let one student be invisible, he realized he'd been building the wrong thing. Or rather, he'd been building the foundation. Now it was time to build something that actually mattered. The Monday after prom arrived with the particular cruelty of regular schedules reasserting themselves after magic. Isabella walked into Jefferson High with her head up for the first time in months, expecting something. Recognition. Maybe. Continuation of the belonging she'd felt on the dance floor. What she got was Monday. The other students were polite. Some smiled. A few even said hi. But by third period, the social patterns had reset to their default configurations. The popular kids were the popular kids, the athletes were the athletes, and Isabella alone at her desk in the back of AP Biology, watching fruit flies mate under microscopes while her lab partner worked in pointed silence. She told herself it was fine. That one night of acceptance didn't erase the fundamental truth of high school hierarchy. That she should be grateful for what she'd had, not greedy for more. But in her chest, something that had briefly opened began to close again. Naomi noticed. Of course. She always noticed. "How was your first day back?" she asked that afternoon, finding Isabella in her usual spot in the library. "Fine." The word came out flat. "Isabella." "I said it was fine, Miss Carter." The girl's voice had an edge now, defensive. It was great. Really. But it was just one night. I get that. I'm not stupid." Naomi pulled out a chair and sat down, ignoring the librarian's pointed look about disrupting study hall. "You know what I think? I think you're expecting the worst because it feels safer than hoping for something better. Or maybe I'm just being realistic." "There's a difference between realistic and fatalistic," Naomi said gently. "One acknowledges challenges. The other gives up before trying." Isabella's jaw tightened. "What do you want me to do? Walk up to those girls who danced with me and ask to sit with them at lunch? Beg them to be my friends?" "No. I want you to stop waiting for permission to exist fully in your own life." Naomi leaned forward. "You showed everyone, including yourself, that you could dance. That was huge. But now comes the harder part, showing up every day. Not just when there's a spotlight and music. But in the regular moments. The boring ones. The ones where nobody's watching. That's exhausting." "Being invisible is more exhausting," Naomi countered. "Trust me." They sat in silence, surrounded by the library's familiar smell of old books and industrial carpet cleaner. Finally, Isabella spoke, her voice smaller. "What if I try and it doesn't work? What if I put myself out there and they still don't want me? Then at least you'll know. And you can decide what to do with that information." Naomi stood, gathering her things. "But Isabella? I don't think that's what's going to happen. Not if you give them, and yourself, a chance." What Naomi didn't mention was the conversation she'd had with Principal Henderson that morning. The one where he'd pulled her aside with an uncomfortable expression and said, "We need to talk about appropriate boundaries with students." She'd known immediately what he meant. Someone had complained, probably a parent, possibly a teacher, about her relationship with Isabella. About the private practice sessions, the invitation to prom as a guest, the visible emotion during their dance. "I'm not doing anything inappropriate," Naomi had said, keeping her voice level despite the anger rising in her chest. "I'm not suggesting you are," Henderson had replied, but his tone said otherwise. "I'm just reminding you that we have protocols. That appearance matters. That a teacher dancing with a student at a school event, with that level of intensity, it raises questions." "Questions about what?" Exactly. Henderson had shifted uncomfortably. About favoritism. About whether you're maintaining professional distance. About whether your investment in this particular student is clouding your judgment. Naomi had wanted to scream. Had wanted to point out that male coaches hugged their athletes all the time, that white teachers formed close mentorships with white students without anyone batting an eye, that her investment was called caring and it was literally her job. Instead, she'd said, Isabella Torres is a student who was struggling to find her place. I helped her discover a way to engage with her peers and feel confident in her abilities. That's what teachers are supposed to do. Just be mindful, Henderson had said, which was administrator speak for I'm covering my ass by warning you. Now, watching Isabella gather her books and leave the library with shoulders that weren't quite as straight as they'd been on prom night, Naomi felt the familiar weight of fighting battles that should have been won decades ago. The battle to be seen as professional, not threatening. The battle to care visibly without being accused of impropriety. The battle to exist in white spaces without making white people uncomfortable. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. This is Grant Morrison. I hope this isn't overstepping, but I wanted to follow up on our conversation. Are you free for coffee this week? I have some ideas I'd like to discuss. Naomi stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of her wanted to decline. She had enough complications in her life without adding a millionaire philanthropist to the mix. But another part, the part that remembered his tears during the dance, the genuine emotion in his voice when he talked about the boy on the bleachers, that part was curious. Wednesday afternoon. There's a coffee shop on Lexington Avenue called The Grind. 4 p.m. His response came quickly, I'll be there. Grant Morrison spent the 2 days before their meeting trying to articulate what, exactly, he wanted to say to Naomi Carter. He'd built his career on clear communication, on translating complex technical concepts into language that investors and clients could understand. But this felt different. Personal in a way that business never was. He'd been haunted by prom night. By Isabella's transformation from invisible to visible. By Naomi's steady grace, the way she'd moved through that ballroom like she carried her own gravity. By the realization that he'd spent 23 years building wealth instead of meaning. His assistant, Jennifer, noticed his distraction during a board meeting on Tuesday. You okay, boss? She asked afterward, finding him staring out his office window instead of reviewing the quarterly projections. You seemed a million miles away in there. Just thinking about the foundation, Grant said, which was technically true. About whether we're actually making a difference or just writing checks to make ourselves feel better. Jennifer studied him with the frank assessment of someone who'd worked for him for a decade. This is about that high school prom, isn't it? The one you sponsored in Asheville. Grant turned to face her. How did you? You've looked at the photo album from that event 17 times in the past 3 days. The analytics on our shared drive tracks that. She smiled slightly. Also, you've been researching adaptive dance programs, inclusive education initiatives, and accessibility grants. Not exactly subtle. He had to laugh. Am I that transparent? Only to people who know you. To everyone else, you're still the inscrutable tech genius. She paused. So what are you really asking yourself? Grant considered the question. Whether it's possible to undo 20 years of building the wrong thing. Wrong thing? Grant, you've built a company worth $3 billion. You employ 8,000 people. The Morrison Foundation has donated $50 million to educational causes in the past 5 years alone. Numbers, Grant said. All of it. Just numbers. Impressive numbers, sure, but... He struggled for the words. I watched a teacher dance with a student who everyone else had learned to ignore, and in that moment, she did better than I've done with $50 million. Because she saw. She witnessed. She made that girl feel like her life had value not because of what she could do, but because of who she was. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. Then, so what are you going to do about it? I don't know yet, Grant admitted. But I'm meeting her Wednesday. The teacher. Naomi Carter. Maybe she can help me figure it out. Wednesday arrived with unseasonable rain, the kind of steady drizzle that turned Chevel's mountain views into watercolor smears. Grant arrived at the grind 15 minutes early, claimed a corner table, and ordered a black coffee he didn't drink. He felt nervous in a way he hadn't since his first major investor pitch 25 years ago. Naomi arrived exactly at 4, shaking rain from her jacket and looking around the crowded coffee shop until her eyes found his. She moved toward him with that same deliberate grace he remembered from the ballroom, and he stood automatically, suddenly hyper-aware of the differences between them. His expensive watch, her practical canvas bag, his tailored clothes, her teacher's salary wardrobe, his world of boardrooms and private jets, her world of classroom supplies bought with her own money and students who needed more than she could give. "Thank you for meeting me," Grant said as she sat down. "Can I get you something?" "Just tea. Earl Grey, if they have it." He went to the counter, grateful for the moment to collect himself, and returned with her tea and a blueberry muffin he'd noticed her eyeing. "I wasn't sure if you'd eaten," he said. Naomi smiled slightly. Thoughtful. "Though I should warn you, Mr. Morrison, Grant, I'm not easily impressed by money. If that's what this meeting is about." "It's not." He paused. "Or rather, it is, but not the way you're thinking. Can I ask you something first?" "Go ahead." "Why do you teach?" The question clearly surprised her. She wrapped her hands around the tea mug, considering. "That's a bigger question than you might realize." "I've got time." Naomi took a sip of tea, her eyes distant. "When I was in 8th grade, I had a teacher, Mrs. Washington, who pulled me aside one day and said, 'Naomi, I see you trying to disappear. I see you making yourself small. And I need you to know that the world needs you at full size.'" Just like that. Out of nowhere. She refocused on Grant. "I'd spent my whole life up to that point being the smart black girl who didn't make waves, who worked twice as hard to be half as visible. And she saw me. Really saw me. Not what I could do for her, not how I could make her look good, but me. My potential. My worth. So you became a teacher to do the same for others." "I became a teacher because I realized that being seen, really seen, can change everything. It can be the difference between a life half-lived and a life fully inhabited." She met his eyes. "That's what I did for Isabella. I saw her. And I refused to let her disappear." Grant felt something click into place in his chest. "That's what I want to help you do. Systematically. Not just for Isabella, but for every kid like her." Naomi set down her mug. "Okay. I'm listening." He pulled out his tablet, called up a presentation he'd worked on until 3 that morning. The Morrison Foundation currently focuses on broad educational initiatives, computer labs, scholarship funds, STEM programs. All important, but all impersonal. After prom night, I started researching adaptive education, inclusive programming, accessibility initiatives. Do you know what I found? Not enough funding and a lot of lip service. Exactly. He turned the tablet toward her. Most schools have minimal resources for students with physical disabilities or differences. The adaptive PE programs that exist are underfunded, understaffed, and treated as afterthoughts. Teachers like you, teachers who actually give a damn, are left to improvise with whatever scraps they can find. Preaching to the choir, Naomi said, but there was interest in her eyes now. What if it didn't have to be that way? Grant swiped to the next slide. "I want to create a pilot program. Full funding for adaptive education initiatives at Jefferson High, equipment, training, curriculum development, whatever you need. But more than that, I want to document what works. Create a replicable model that other schools can implement. Prove that inclusive education isn't charity, it's good pedagogy that helps all students." Naomi leaned forward, studying the screen. "This is ambitious. Is it feasible?" "Depends on execution." She scrolled through his presentation, her brilliant mind clearly working. "You'd need buy-in from administration, cooperation from existing teachers, careful measurement of outcomes. You'd need to train people who don't necessarily want to change their methods. And you'd need to do it all without making it feel like you're parachuting in to save us poor public school teachers." "That's why I need you," Grant said. "This can't be some rich guy's vanity project. It has to be teacher-led, student-centered, authentic. I can provide resources, but you'd provide the vision, the expertise, the connection to what students actually needs." Naomi sat back, her expression unreadable. "Why me, specifically? There are teachers with more experience in adaptive education, people with credentials in this exact field." "Because you dance with students everyone else ignores," Grant said simply. Because you see people. And that fundamental act of witness, that's what makes the difference between a program that checks boxes and one that actually changes lives. The coffee shop hummed around them, espresso machines hissing, conversations overlapping, rain pattering against the windows. Naomi looked out at the grey afternoon, and Grant could see her weighing possibilities against complications. "There's something you should know," she said finally. "Yesterday, my principal pulled me aside. Someone complained about my relationship with Isabella. Said I was too emotionally involved, that the dance at prom crossed professional boundaries." Grant felt anger flash through him. That's absurd. That's reality. Naomi's voice was matter-of-fact, but he could hear the exhaustion underneath. "I'm a black woman teaching in a predominantly white school. Every move I make is scrutinized. Every connection I form with a student is questioned. If I take your money, if I lead this program, I become even more visible. Which means I become an even bigger target. So what are you saying?" "I'm saying that this is complicated. That good intentions aren't enough. That I need to know you understand what you're asking me to risk." Grant set down his coffee cup. "Can I tell you a story?" Naomi gestured for him to continue. "When I was 13, after that diagnosis I mentioned, my parents started treating me like I was already dying. Every conversation became about limitations. What I couldn't do, what I shouldn't try, how I needed to adjust my expectations. They meant well. They were terrified. But their fear was suffocating me." He paused, remembering. "Then Mr. Lawson, my adaptive PE teacher, pulled me aside. He said, 'Grant, I don't know what your future looks like. Nobody does. But I know that right now, today, you're alive. And you can choose to live like you're dying, or you can choose to live like you're living. Simple as that. And it saved me." "What happened to him?" Naomi asked. "Mr. Lawson. He got fired 2 years later. Not for anything he did wrong, but because the school cut the entire adaptive program to save money. Last I heard, he was teaching at a private school in Florida." Grant met her eyes. "The people who dare to care always risk the most. I know that. I'm not pretending otherwise. What I'm offering is resources to support the risk. Protection, to the extent money can provide it. And partnership, you're not in this alone." Naomi was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone, scrolled to something, and handed it to him. On the screen was a photo, Isabella, surrounded by other students at lunch, laughing at something someone had said. The image was recent, taken that day based on the timestamp. "She sent me this an hour ago," Naomi said softly. "With a message, having lunch with new friends. Thank you for making me brave." She took the phone back, looked at the image with fierce tenderness. "That's why I teach. For moments like this. For students who learn that they're worth more than their limitations." "So, you'll do it?" Grant asked. "You'll lead the program?" "On one condition." Naomi's voice was firm now, all business. "This isn't about you feeling good or assuaging guilt about your privileged past. This isn't therapy for either of us. This is about students like Isabella who deserve better than what the system is giving them. If you can commit to that, to really putting them first even when it's inconvenient or doesn't photograph well for your foundation's website, then yes, I'm in." Grant extended his hand. "You have my word." Naomi shook it, her grip firm and sure. "Then let's change some lives." They spent the next hour sketching out details, timelines, budgets, the logistics of getting school board approval. Grant was impressed by Naomi's practical knowledge, her ability to anticipate obstacles and design solutions. She wasn't just passionate, she was strategic, careful, smart. As they gathered their things to leave, Grant felt compelled to say one more thing. "Naomi, for what it's worth, anyone who thinks you're too emotionally involved with your students is confusing caring with unprofessionalism. The world needs more teachers who give a damn, not fewer." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. The world says it needs that. But it doesn't always reward it. Remember that, when things get complicated. "Things are already complicated," Grant said. "Fair point." She shouldered her bag. "I'll put together a proposal for the program. Something we can present to Henderson and the school board. Give me a week. Take whatever time you need." They walked out together into the rain, which had softened to a mist. At the parking lot, they paused, and Grant had the strangest sensation, like they were standing at the edge of something significant, about to step off together into unknown territory. "I'm glad you texted," Naomi said. "And I'm glad you were there that night. At prom. Some things happen for a reason." "Or maybe some people make reasons happen," Grant replied. "You made that night matter. I just witnessed it." "Then let's both keep witnessing," Naomi said. "Let's both keep seeing the kids everyone else learned to ignore." She got into her car, a 10-year-old Honda with a dent in the passenger door and "Educators Make a Difference" bumper sticker, and drove away. Grant stood in the parking lot longer than necessary, watching her taillights disappear into the misty afternoon. His phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. "How did the meeting go?" He typed back, "I think I just found my purpose." In the quiet of that rain-soaked parking lot, two people from completely different worlds had just agreed to build something together, something bigger than either of them alone. Have you ever met someone who challenged you to think differently about your purpose? Someone who made you want to be more than you were? Share your story in the comments below, because sometimes, the people who change us are the ones we least expect to meet. The next week unfolded like dominoes falling. Naomi drafted a comprehensive proposal for the Inclusive Excellence Program, a name Grant had suggested after 3 rounds of back-and-forth emails. The program would include upgraded adaptive equipment, teacher training in inclusive pedagogy, peer mentorship initiatives, and most importantly, funding for a full-time inclusive education coordinator position. "That should be you," Grant had said when she'd shown him the draft during a second coffee meeting. "Can't be," Naomi had replied. "I'm already full-time teaching. And honestly, I'm more effective in the classroom than I would be in administration." "Then who?" Naomi had smiled. "I have someone in mind. Let me make a call." The person she had in mind was Dr. Marcus Chen. No, wait. Dr. William Chen. Grant reminded himself of the character name restrictions, a disability rights advocate and former teacher who'd been doing consulting work but was looking for something more permanent. Naomi had known him from her graduate program, respected his work, trusted his commitment to authentic inclusion rather than performative accessibility. They'd brought him in for a meeting with Principal Henderson, Grant, and the school board's education committee. William had been brilliant, passionate but practical, visionary but grounded. He'd presented data on improved outcomes for all students in truly inclusive environments, challenged the committee's assumptions about cost and feasibility, and made it clear that this wasn't charity but excellence. The board had approved the program by a vote of 6-2. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the eye of a storm. The dissenting votes had come from board members Thompson and Richards, both parents of students at Jefferson, both vocal about maintaining standards and not lowering the bar. Within days of the vote, a petition started circulating online, Concerned Parents for Educational Excellence. The language was careful, coded. Nothing explicitly discriminatory. Just concerns about resource allocation, about whether special programs would distract from core academics, about whether the school was being pressured by outside interests to implement experimental methodologies. Grant, reading the petition in his office, recognized the rhetoric immediately. He'd heard it before, in different contexts. Tech bros complaining about diversity initiatives, investors worried about political correctness, people whose privilege was so naturalized they couldn't see it as privilege. He called Naomi immediately. "Have you seen the petition?" "I've seen it." Her voice was tight. "I've also had 3 separate parents request meetings with me to express their concerns. And Henderson called me in this morning to remind me, again, about maintaining professional boundaries. This is retaliation. They're trying to undermine the program before it even starts." "They're trying to undermine me," Naomi corrected. "The program is just the excuse. This is what always happens. Anytime a black woman stands up and says we can do better, there's a chorus of voices insisting that what we have is just fine, that change is dangerous, that I'm the problem." Grant heard the exhaustion in her voice, the weight of fighting battles that should have been won generations ago. "What do you need from me?" "I don't know." A long pause. "Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I should have stayed small, stayed safe. Just helped Isabella quietly and left it at that." "You don't believe that?" "No," Naomi admitted. "But I'm tired, Grant. I'm tired of being brave. I'm tired of every good thing I try to do being questioned and scrutinized and picked apart. I'm tired of having to be twice as qualified and 3 times as careful just to be seen as half as competent. Grant closed his eyes, feeling helpless in a way that money couldn't fix. Naomi. I need to go. I have a class in 5 minutes. She hung up before he could respond. That night, Grant did something he hadn't done in years. He drove to Asheville, showed up unannounced at Jefferson High School at 6 p.m., and found Naomi still in her office, grading papers under the fluorescent lights. She looked up when he knocked, surprise flickering across her face. Grant? What are you doing here? Making sure you're okay. I'm fine. You're not. He stepped into the office, closed the door behind him. And you don't have to pretend you are. Not with me. Naomi set down her pen. Why do you care so much? Really? We barely know each other. Because you remind me of Mr. Lawson, Grant said. And because I watched him get ground down by a system that valued conformity over courage. I watched him save my life and then get punished for it. And I was too young and too powerless to help him. But I'm not anymore. I'm not young, and I'm not powerless, and I'll be damned if I watch it happen again. Something in Naomi's expression cracked. I don't need you to save me, Grant. I know. You're not the one who needs saving. The system is. But maybe we can break it together. Or at least dent it enough that the next person has an easier time. Naomi laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. You're impossibly idealistic for a tech billionaire. And you're impossibly strong for someone who claims to be tired. They sat in silence for a moment, the office small and warm and separate from the world outside. Finally, Naomi spoke. Isabella came to see me today. She's thinking about auditioning for the school's spring showcase. Wants to do an adaptive dance piece. Her voice softened. She asked if I'd help her choreograph it. What did you say? I said yes. Of course, I said yes. Naomi looked at him. That's what this is about, right? Not the program or the funding or the politics. It's about students like Isabella who deserve to be seen. Who deserve to know their lives have value. That's exactly what this is about, Grant agreed. Then I guess I keep going. Naomi stood, started gathering her papers. Even when it's hard. Even when there's pushback. Because the alternative is letting them win. And I refuse to do that. Grant stood too. For what it's worth, you're not alone in this. Whatever happens, I'm with you. Why? The question was direct, vulnerable. Why do you care so much about this? About me? Grant considered lying, giving some corporate answer about responsibility and mission alignment. But Naomi deserved better than that. Because when I watched you dance with Isabella, I saw what my life could have been about. Should have been about. And I want to spend whatever time I have left building something that matters. Something real. And I think, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I think you know how to do that in a way I never learned. So maybe I'm not helping you. Maybe you're helping me. Naomi studied him, her brilliant mind clearly working. This is going to get messy, you know. The petition is just the beginning. There'll be more resistance, more pushback. People who want to maintain the status quo are always louder than people who want change. Let them be loud, Grant said. We'll be persistent. She smiled then, genuine and warm. Persistent. I like that better than brave. They walked out of the school together, into a spring night that smelled of honeysuckle and possibility. In 3 weeks, the Inclusive Excellence program would officially launch. In 6 weeks, Isabella would perform her adaptive dance at the spring showcase. And in the months after that, everything would change in ways neither of them could predict. But tonight, in this moment, there were just 2 people who decided that seeing mattered more than safety. That witness was worth the risk. And that sometimes, the most radical thing you could do was refuse to let anyone be invisible. The spring showcase was scheduled for the last Friday in May, 6 weeks after the Inclusive Excellence program had officially launched. Those 6 weeks had been a masterclass in how change moved, not in smooth, triumphant arcs, but in jagged stops and starts, 2 steps forward and 1 grinding step back. The program itself was working. William Chen had started as coordinator, and within days, his presence was transforming Jefferson High. He'd installed new adaptive equipment in the gym, initiated training sessions for teachers, created a peer mentorship program that paired students with and without disabilities. The changes were subtle but significant: ramps that appeared where there had been stairs, flexible seating options in classrooms, a culture slowly shifting from accommodation as afterthought to inclusion as foundation. But success bred resistance. The Concerned Parents for Educational Excellence group had grown from a petition to an organized force. They'd started showing up at school board meetings, armed with prepared statements about fiscal responsibility and academic standards. They demanded data on how the new program affected test scores, questioned whether resources were being diverted from mainstream students, suggested that perhaps Jefferson wasn't the right environment for students with significant challenges. The language was always careful, always coded. But the message was clear: some students belonged, and others didn't. Grant had learned to recognize the ringleaders. Thompson, a lawyer whose daughter was captain of the dance team and who seemed personally offended that Isabella might share the stage with her. Richards, a real estate developer who'd built his fortune on exclusive gated communities and who apparently viewed high school the same way. And Martinez, a new addition to the opposition, a mother whose son had missed out on a leadership position in student government and who'd somehow decided the Inclusive Excellence program was to blame. They tried to go after the funding first, demanding audits of how Morrison Foundation money was being spent. Grant's lawyers had shut that down quickly. The donation was clean, the allocation transparent, and any suggestion otherwise bordered on slander. So they'd pivoted to going after Naomi. It started with small things. Complaints about her teaching methods. Questions about her grading practices. Concerns that she was spending too much time with Isabella and not enough with other students. Each complaint was investigated by Henderson, each one found baseless, but the accumulation was taking its toll. Grant watched Naomi transform over those 6 weeks. Not breaking, exactly, but hardening, developing a protective shell that worried him because he recognized it. He'd worn the same armor for years, the same defensive posture against a world that questioned his right to exist fully. "They're not going to stop," she'd said during one of their now regular coffee meetings. "Not until they drive me out or shut down the program." "Then we don't give them that satisfaction," Grant had replied, trying to inject confidence he didn't entirely feel. Now, the night of the spring showcase, everything was coming to a head. Grant arrived at Jefferson High's auditorium at 6 p.m., an hour before the show was scheduled to start. The parking lot was already half full, parents arriving early to stake out good seats, students clustering in excited groups, the particular electricity of performance night crackling through the air. He found Naomi backstage, clipboard in hand, orchestrating the organized chaos of student performers. She looked exhausted but determined, wearing black slacks and a deep purple blouse that somehow made her look both professional and approachable. "How's she doing?" Grant asked, not needing to specify who she was. "Terrified," Naomi said. "But ready. She's been practicing every day for 6 weeks. The choreography is solid, the music is cued, and her mom is in the front row crying already." She paused. "Thompson's here too. Front row, 3 seats from Isabella's mother. She's been making comments loud enough to hear about how brave it is that Isabella is performing, with air quotes you can practically see." Grant felt anger flash through him. "Want me to have her removed? On what grounds? Being passive-aggressive isn't a crime." Naomi checked her watch. "Besides, Isabella knows she's here. And you know what she said? Good. Let her watch. Let her see what I can do." "That's the spirit." "That's terror masquerading as courage," Naomi corrected. "But sometimes that's the same thing." The auditorium filled quickly. By 7 p.m., every seat was taken, with people standing in the back. Grant had claimed a seat in the middle section, close enough to see clearly, far enough back to observe the whole audience. He watched families settle in, programs rustling, phones being silenced. And he watched Thompson, Richards, and Martinez clustered together in their front row seats. 3 people united by the conviction that change was something that happened to other schools, not theirs. The lights dimmed. Principal Henderson took the stage to scattered applause. "Welcome to Jefferson High's annual spring showcase," he began, his voice carrying that particular blend of enthusiasm and exhaustion that characterized end-of-year school events. "Tonight, we celebrate the incredible talent of our students across all disciplines: music, dance, theater, and visual arts. I want to thank everyone who made this evening possible, particularly our new Inclusive Excellence program, which has expanded opportunities for all our students." There was applause, but Grant noticed it was uneven, enthusiastic from some sections, perfunctory from others. The show began. A choir performance, surprisingly good. A jazz band that fumbled through a complicated arrangement but recovered with grace. A series of monologues from the drama club, some touching, some comedic, all earnest in the way that teenage performances always were. And then, after intermission, the dance performances began. The dance team went first, Thompson's daughter front and center, executing a technically proficient hip-hop routine that earned thunderous applause. They were good. Grant could acknowledge that objectively. Tight choreography, sharp movements, the kind of performance that came from hours of practice and natural talent. But they weren't Isabella. Naomi appeared in the aisle beside him as the dance team finished. She didn't sit, just stood there vibrating with nervous energy. "She's next," Naomi whispered. "She's going to be incredible. Or she's going to fall. Or freeze. Or..." "Naomi." Grant caught her hand, squeezed it briefly. "Breathe. You taught her to be brave. Now you have to be brave too." The stage went dark. Grant heard Naomi's sharp intake of breath. When the lights came up, Isabella stood center stage. She wore a simple dress, deep blue like twilight, with a skirt that flowed when she moved. Her leg brace was visible, not hidden, not camouflaged, just part of her. She stood absolutely still for a moment, her head down, and Grant could feel the entire auditorium holding its breath. Then the music started. It was different than Grant expected, not triumphant or defiant, but hauntingly beautiful. A piano melody that felt like rain, like memory, like all the things we lose and learn to live without. And Isabella began to move. The choreography Naomi had created was genius. It acknowledged Isabella's brace without being defined by it. Her movements were smaller than a traditional dance, more grounded, but there was something in them, something raw and real and utterly unself-conscious. She used her good leg for pivots and turns, her braced leg as an anchor point, her upper body to express what her lower body couldn't. She wasn't dancing despite her limitation. She was dancing with it, through it, transforming constraint into art. The audience was transfixed. Grant could see it in the way they leaned forward, in the absolute silence that had fallen over the auditorium. This wasn't pity-watching. This was genuine witness, recognition that they were seeing something rare and true. Then, midway through the piece, something extraordinary happened. Naomi walked onto the stage. It wasn't planned. Grant could tell by the way Isabella's eyes widened, by the sudden murmur that went through the audience. But Naomi moved with such certainty, such purpose, that it felt inevitable, like this was how it was always supposed to happen. She didn't take over. She joined. Moved beside Isabella, her own movements echoing and amplifying the girls, creating a dialogue of motion. Teacher and student, two women moving together, showing the audience what partnership looked like, what true support meant. Isabella's face transformed. The fear that had been visible in her shoulders, in the careful way she'd been holding herself, evaporated. She smiled, not a performance smile, but genuine joy, and her movements opened up, became bolder, more expressive. They danced together for 30 seconds that felt infinite. Then Naomi stepped back, giving Isabella the stage again, and the girl finished the piece alone. But not alone, because everyone in that auditorium was with her now, inside the story she was telling with her body. The music faded. Isabella struck her final pose, one arm reaching upward, her face tilted toward the light. Silence. Then someone stood up. Not from the front row, but from the back, a student, one of the boys who danced with Isabella at prom. He started clapping, loud and enthusiastic. And like a wave, the rest of the students rose with him, applause building and building until it was deafening. The adults stood more slowly, but they stood. Row after row of parents and teachers rising to their feet, applauding a performance that had been brave and vulnerable and absolutely beautiful. Grant looked at the front row. At Thompson, Richards, and Martinez. They were standing too, but their applause was mechanical, their faces tight with something that looked like defeat. Because they'd lost. In this moment, in this space, their careful campaign of exclusion had been answered by a 14-year-old girl who'd refused to be invisible. Backstage, Isabella collapsed into Naomi's arms, sobbing with release and relief and overwhelming emotion. Grant watched from the wings as Naomi held her, whispering things he couldn't hear, being the steady presence this girl needed. "That was extraordinary," Principal Henderson said, appearing beside Grant. "Truly extraordinary." It was truth, Grant replied. That's what made it extraordinary. Henderson was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "The board is meeting next week. There's going to be a vote on whether to continue the Inclusive Excellence program." Grant turned to face him. "It's been 6 weeks. The program is working. You've seen the results." "I have. But Thompson, Richards, and Martinez have been making noise. They've convinced 2 other board members that we need to reassess resource allocation. They have the votes to shut it down. Then we convince them otherwise." "How?" Henderson's frustration was evident. They're not interested in data or outcomes. They're interested in maintaining their version of how things should be. And they have enough influence. "They have money," Grant interrupted. "But I have more. And I have something else they don't. I have right on my side." Henderson looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Morrison, I appreciate everything you've done, but nothing." Grant kept his voice level, but steel ran underneath. "That girl just showed this entire community what's possible when we stop making excuses and start making space. If the board votes to shut down the program, I will make it my personal mission to ensure every single person in Asheville knows exactly why. I will fund a campaign, I will call press conferences, I will turn this into a national story about a school that chose exclusion over excellence. Do I make myself clear?" Henderson swallowed. "That sounds like a threat." "It's a promise. You wanted my money? You got it. But you don't get to take the credit for progress and then cave to bigots because they're making you uncomfortable. You want to lead? Then lead. Support Naomi. Support Isabella. Support every student in this building who deserves better than what they're getting." Before Henderson could respond, Isabella emerged from backstage, her mother beside her, both of them glowing. The girl made a beeline for Grant, surprising him with a fierce hug. "Thank you," she said into his chest. "Miss Carter told me you're the reason the program exists. Thank you for seeing me." Grant found himself blinking back unexpected tears. "You made yourself seen, Isabella. That was all you." "No." She pulled back, looked up at him with wet eyes and a brilliant smile. "It was all of us. Miss Carter, you, Dr. Chen, everyone who refused to let me disappear." She paused. "I'm not invisible anymore. And I'm never going to be invisible again." Naomi joined them, and Grant saw something in her face, triumph mixed with exhaustion, joy shadowed by the knowledge that the fight wasn't over. "We need to talk," she said quietly to Grant. They found an empty classroom down the hall, closed the door against the continuing celebration in the auditorium. Naomi leaned against a desk, her professional composure finally cracking. "Henderson told you about the vote." Grant nodded. "I'm not letting them shut this down. It's not your choice." Naomi's voice was gentle but firm. "This is my job, my school, my community. If the board votes to end the program, I have to accept that." "The hell you do." "Grant." She said his name like a sigh. "I know you're used to fixing things with money and force of will. But this isn't a business deal. These are people's lives, people's livelihoods. If you go to war with the board, I'm the one who'll pay the price. I'm the one who has to keep working here after you've driven back to Charlotte." The truth of that landed like a punch. Grant had been so focused on winning that he hadn't considered what winning might cost her. "So what do you want me to do?" he asked. "I want you to let me handle it." Naomi straightened, and he saw the steel that had carried her through 6 weeks of attacks. "I want you to trust that I know how to fight battles you've never had to imagine. And I want you to be there, supporting from the side, not charging in like some white knight who thinks he can save the day." "I don't think." "Yes, you do." She wasn't angry, just stating facts. "You absolutely think that. Because you're used to being the one with power, with resources, with the ability to make things happen. But Grant, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back. Be present without taking over. Witness without controlling." Grant absorbed that, recognizing the truth in it even as it chafed against every instinct he developed over decades of building an empire. "What do you need from me?" he asked finally. "I need you to come to that board meeting. Sit in the audience. Don't speak unless I ask you to. Just be there, so they know I'm not alone." She paused. "And I need you to trust that whatever happens, I can handle it." "What if they vote to end the program?" Then we adapt. Naomi's smile was sad but determined. That's what we do, right? We adapt. We find new ways to move through the world. We keep seeing people, even when systems try to make them invisible. Someone knocked on the classroom door, a student looking for Naomi, something about the schedule for the rest of the performances. She excused herself, leaving Grant alone in the empty classroom with his thoughts and his privilege and his sudden, uncomfortable awareness of how often he'd confused resources with righteousness. He pulled out his phone, pulled up the videos someone had already posted to social media. Isabella's performance, filmed from the audience, the applause at the end almost distorting the audio. The comments were rolling in. This made me cry. So beautiful. That's my classmate. So proud of her. Why am I sobbing at a high school dance performance? This is what inclusion actually looks like. But there were other comments too. Nice, but why does she get special treatment? What about the other students who worked just as hard? Seems like the school is spending a lot of resources on one student. Grant recognized the rhetoric. The same careful language, the same coded concerns. The battle lines were being drawn, not just in board meetings and parent petitions, but in comment sections and community conversations. And Naomi was right. He couldn't fight this battle for her. He could only stand beside her while she fought it herself. He returned to the auditorium for the rest of the showcase. Found his seat. Watched the remaining performances with half his attention while his mind spun through scenarios and possibilities. After the final curtain call, as families filed out into the spring night, he saw Thompson intercept Isabella and her mother near the exit. Grant moved closer, not interfering but within earshot. That was a very brave performance, Thompson was saying, her voice dripping with condescension. Of course, in a professional setting, there are certain standards that need to be maintained. But for a school showcase, it was quite touching. Isabella's mother bristled, but Isabella herself spoke before anyone else could. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. The girl's voice was calm, assured. Your daughter is a beautiful dancer. Very technical. But I think maybe she could learn something about dancing with feeling instead of just precision. I'd be happy to teach her, if she's interested. The offer was genuine, delivered without malice, which somehow made it more devastating than any insult could have been. Thompson's face went through several expressions before settling on a tight smile. That won't be necessary. Emma has private instructors. Of course she does. Isabella's smile was sweet and sharp. But if she ever wants to learn how to dance from the heart instead of just hitting marks, I'll be in the gym every Tuesday after school. Miss Carter teaches an adaptive movement class. Everyone's welcome. She walked away then, leaving Thompson speechless in the lobby. Grant caught up with Isabella and her mother in the parking lot. That was masterfully handled, he said. Isabella grinned. Miss Carter told me that the best revenge is excellence. I figured the second best revenge is kindness that makes mean people feel small. Her mother laughed, proud and fierce. Where did you get so wise? I had good teachers. Isabella looked at Grant. You're coming to the board meeting, right? Next Tuesday. I'll be there. Good. Because I'm coming too. And I'm going to tell them exactly why the Inclusive Excellence program needs to stay. Her expression sobered. I'm not going to let them erase what Miss Carter built. What we all built together. Grant felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that this wasn't his fight to win or lose. It was Isabella's fight, Naomi's fight, the fight of every student who'd ever been told they didn't belong. His job was just to show up. To witness. To use his resources to amplify voices that deserved to be heard. I'll see you Tuesday, he promised. Driving back to Charlotte that night, Grant made a series of phone calls. To his PR team, asking them to prepare messaging around inclusive education. To his lawyers, asking them to research board governance and voting procedures. To Jennifer, asking her to clear his schedule for the next week. And finally, to his therapist, the one he'd been seeing monthly for the past 5 years, working through the complicated legacy of a childhood spent thinking he was dying. I need to talk about savior complexes, he said when she answered. And about the difference between helping and taking over. And about how to be an ally without being an asshole. Dr. Patterson laughed, warm and knowing. Sounds like you're finally learning the right questions. Come in tomorrow. We have work to do. Tuesday arrived with the weight of all consequential days, ordinary on the surface, momentous underneath. Grant wore a suit but skipped the tie, trying to walk the line between professional and approachable. He arrived at the school board offices an hour early, found a coffee shop across the street, and waited. Naomi arrived at 6:30, dressed in a navy blazer and cream blouse, carrying a leather portfolio that looked new. She spotted him through the window and came inside. "You're here early." "Couldn't sleep," Grant admitted. "You?" "Same." She ordered tea, sat down across from him. "Isabella's coming. So is her mother. So are about 20 other students from the program. William organized them. He's been coaching them on how to speak at public meetings, how to tell their stories effectively." "That's good, right?" "It's terrifying." Naomi's hands wrapped around her mug. "Because it means we're putting kids in the line of fire. Asking them to defend their right to exist in a space that should welcome them automatically. Would you rather they stayed home?" "No." She met his eyes. "I'd rather we lived in a world where this meeting wasn't necessary. But we don't, so we fight." The board meeting room was packed by 7 p.m. Grant had never attended one of these before, and he was struck by the particular democracy of it. Folding chairs arranged in rows, a table at the front for the board members, fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill. This was where policy got made, where futures got decided, in rooms that smelled like old coffee and institutional carpet cleaner. He took a seat in the middle section. Naomi sat in the front row, Isabella beside her. Grant recognized other students from the program scattered throughout the audience. William Chen had clearly done his organizing work well. Thompson, Richards, and Martinez sat together on the left side, surrounded by their supporters. Grant did a quick head count, roughly 50 people in the room, split maybe 6-40 in favor of the program based on the inclusive excellence buttons some people were wearing. The board filed in at 7 sharp. 7 members total, including Thompson, who apparently served on the board in addition to being a vocal opponent of the program, a clear conflict of interest, but apparently legal. Board President Angela Liu called the meeting to order. They moved through routine business quickly, approving minutes, discussing budget allocations for summer maintenance, debating whether to change the school lunch menu. Grant watched the choreography of democratic process, noting the alliances and tensions that played out in who spoke and how others responded. Finally, they reached the agenda item everyone was waiting for, discussion and potential vote regarding continuation of the Inclusive Excellence Program. President Liu's expression was carefully neutral. "We've received significant public comment on this issue, both in support and opposition. Before we open the floor for public comment, I want to remind everyone that we have a 3-minute time limit per speaker, and all comments should be respectful and focused on the educational merits of the program." Thompson raised her hand. "Madam President, I'd like to make a motion to end the Inclusive Excellence Program, effective end of this school year." "Second," Richards said immediately. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Liu banged her gavel once. "We have a motion on the floor. Before we vote, we'll hear public comment. Those who wish to speak, please line up at the microphone." The line formed quickly. Isabella was third, behind a parent Grant didn't recognize and William Chen. The first speaker was a mother whose son had cerebral palsy. She spoke eloquently about how the program had transformed his experience at school, how for the first time he felt like he belonged instead of being accommodated. "This isn't about special treatment," she concluded, her voice shaking slightly. "It's about basic dignity. My son deserves to feel like a full member of his school community, not a problem to be managed." William Chen spoke next, presenting data on the program's success, improved attendance rates, increased student engagement, positive feedback from teachers. His presentation was clinical, precise, designed to counter the fiscal responsibility arguments with hard numbers. Then it was Isabella's turn. She approached the microphone with her careful, determined gait, the click of her leg brace audible in the suddenly quiet room. Grant watched Thompson's face, saw the flicker of discomfort there, the visible reminder of why they were all here. Isabella adjusted the microphone, looked out at the board, and began to speak. "My name is Isabella Torres. I'm a freshman at Jefferson High. 6 months ago, I was in a car accident that changed my life. I went from being a dancer to being someone who needed a leg brace just to walk. I went from being visible to being invisible." Her voice was steady, clear. Grant saw her hands gripping the podium, the only sign of her nervousness. "When I started at Jefferson, Nobody knew what to do with me. The other students weren't mean, they just didn't see me. I was the girl with the brace, the girl who couldn't do normal things, the girl who didn't fit. And I started to believe that's all I was. She paused, swallowed. Then Miss Carter danced with me. In front of everyone. She didn't pity me. She didn't treat me like I was broken. She just saw me, saw that I still loved music, that I still wanted to move, that I was still the same person I'd always been, just with different challenges. Isabella looked directly at Thompson. Some of you think the Inclusive Excellence Program is about special treatment. That we're taking resources away from regular students. But here's the thing. There is no such thing as a regular student. Every single person in that school has something that makes them different. Some differences are just more visible than others. Her voice gained strength. This program didn't just help me. It helped everyone. Because it taught us that different isn't less. That adaptation isn't weakness. That a community that makes space for everyone is stronger than one that only makes space for people who fit a narrow definition of normal. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. I have letters here from 23 students. Students with dyslexia, students with anxiety disorders, students who are on the autism spectrum, students who don't have any diagnosed condition but who felt like they didn't belong until the Inclusive Excellence Program showed them that belonging isn't something you have to earn, it's something you deserve just by being human. Isabella set the letters on the podium. If you vote to end this program, you're not just ending funding or equipment or training. You're telling every one of us that we're only welcome if we can pretend to be like everyone else. That our dignity is optional. That we don't matter enough to invest in. Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but her voice never wavered. Please don't tell us that. Please don't make us go back to being invisible. She stepped away from the microphone to thunderous applause from half the room. Grant watched the board members' faces, trying to read which way they were leaning. The public comment continued for another hour. Parents on both sides spoke, some passionately defending the program, others expressing concerns about resource allocation and whether Jefferson was equipped to serve students with significant needs. A few teachers spoke in support, including the choir director who described how the program's emphasis on adaptive instruction had improved his teaching for all students. Thompson spoke last, using her position to get the final word. I want to be very clear, she said, her lawyer voice in full effect. Nobody here is saying that students like Isabella don't deserve an education. Nobody here is suggesting we exclude anyone. What we're saying is that Jefferson High has limited resources, and we need to ensure those resources are deployed in a way that benefits the maximum number of students. She shuffled her papers for effect. The Inclusive Excellence Program has cost this district, even with outside funding, significant time and attention. Teacher training hours that could have been spent on curriculum development. Equipment purchases that could have gone to other programs. Administrative focus that has been diverted from our core educational mission. Grant felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his promise to Naomi. He stayed seated, stayed silent. Furthermore, Thompson continued, there are legitimate questions about whether one teacher's close relationship with one student has driven policy decisions that should be based on broader educational considerations. I'm not questioning Miss Carter's dedication or her good intentions. I'm questioning whether her personal investment in this particular student has clouded her professional judgment. The accusation hung in the air. Grant saw Naomi's back stiffens, saw Isabella reach over and squeeze her hand. So, I urge this board to vote yes on the motion to end the Inclusive Excellence Program. Not because we don't care about all students, but precisely because we do. We can better serve everyone by returning to proven educational approaches rather than experimental programs driven by individual relationships. She sat down to applause from her section of the room. President Liu banged her gavel. That concludes public comment. Board members, do you have questions or discussion before we vote? Board member James Martinez, no relation to the parent Martinez, raised his hand. I'd like to hear from Miss Carter. She's been notably silent during these proceedings. Naomi stood, moved to the microphone with that calm grace Grant had come to recognize as her armor. Thank you, Board member Martinez. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. She didn't have notes, didn't need them. Board member Thompson is correct that I have a close relationship with Isabella Torres. I also have close relationships with dozens of other students at Jefferson High. That's called being a good teacher. A few people laughed. Naomi allowed a small smile. But let me address the broader question. Is the Inclusive Excellence Program an experimental approach driven by individual relationships, or is it evidence-based best practice in modern education? She pulled out her tablet, called up a presentation. May I? Liu nodded, and Naomi's screen projected onto the wall behind the board. These are studies from the Journal of Special Education, the International Journal of Inclusive Education, and the American Educational Research Association. All of them show that inclusive education, when properly implemented, improves outcomes for all students. Not just students with disabilities, but their peers as well. She advanced to the next slide. Students in truly inclusive environments show increased empathy, better collaborative skills, and improved academic performance across the board. Why? Because teaching for diversity makes you a better teacher. Period. Another slide. Yes, the Inclusive Excellence Program required upfront investment in training and equipment. But Dr. Chen has provided data showing that these investments are already paying dividends. Student engagement is up. Bullying incidents are down. Teacher satisfaction surveys show improvement across multiple metrics. She looked directly at Thompson. You asked about resource allocation. Let me be blunt, this program is working. The only question is whether we have the courage to continue something that challenges our assumptions about who belongs and how we teach. Naomi closed her tablet. Board member Thompson suggested that my relationship with Isabella has clouded my judgment. I'd argue the opposite. Seeing one student's transformation has clarified my vision. It's shown me what's possible when we stop treating diversity as a problem to solve and start treating it as a strength to cultivate. She paused, and Grant could see the emotion she was fighting to contain. If you vote to end this program, students like Isabella will still be at Jefferson High. They don't disappear just because you defund the resources that help them thrive. They just go back to being invisible. Back to struggling alone. Back to learning that their differences make them less than. Her voice hardened. And the rest of your students will learn a lesson too. They'll learn that when things get uncomfortable, when change requires effort, their community gives up. They'll learn that belonging is conditional. They'll learn that some people matter more than others. Naomi stepped back from the microphone. That's not the lesson I want Jefferson High to teach. I hope it's not the lesson you want to teach either. The room erupted in applause, loud, sustained, coming from students and parents throughout the audience. Grant found himself on his feet without realizing he'd stood, clapping until his palms hurt. President Liu banged her gavel repeatedly, calling for order. When the room finally quieted, she looked at her fellow board members. Any further discussion? Board member Sarah Okonkwo raised her hand. I'd like to make a substitute motion. She waited for Liu's nod. I move that we continue the Inclusive Excellence Program for a full academic year, with quarterly reports to the board on outcomes and implementation. At the end of the year, we can make a more informed decision about permanent adoption. Second, said board member James Martinez immediately. We have a substitute motion on the floor, Liu said. All in favor. Grant held his breath. Aye, said Okonkwo. Aye, said Martinez. Aye, said Liu herself. Aye, said board member Patel, who hadn't spoken all night. 4 votes. They needed 1 more for majority. Opposed. Nay, said Thompson. Nay, said Richards. Board member Carson, who'd been silent the entire meeting, shifted in his seat. Grant could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing political alliances against what he'd heard tonight. Board member Carson. Liu prompted. Carson cleared his throat. Aye. The room exploded. Students cheering, parents applauding, Isabella dissolving into tears in Naomi's arms. The motion had passed 5-2. The program would continue. Grant found himself surrounded by students he didn't know, thanking him, hugging him, their joy infectious and overwhelming. Over their heads, he caught Naomi's eye. She was crying openly now, still holding Isabella, and the look she gave him was pure gratitude mixed with exhaustion. Thompson and her allies filed out quickly, their faces tight with barely contained anger. Grant knew this wasn't over. They'd regroup, find new angles of attack, continue their campaign. But tonight, in this moment, the right side had won. The crowd spilled out into the parking lot, the spring night warm and full of possibility. Grant hung back, letting the students and parents celebrate, watching Naomi accept congratulations and hugs from what seemed like half the county. Finally, as the crowd thinned, she made her way over to him. "You kept your promise," she said. "You stayed quiet." "It killed me," Grant admitted. "Especially during Thompson's speech." "I know. But it mattered. This had to be our victory, not yours." She smiled, tired but genuine. "Though having a tech billionaire in the audience probably didn't hurt our cause. Happy to be useful set decoration." Naomi laughed. Then her expression grew serious. "This isn't over. You know that, right? Thompson and her faction, they're going to spend the next year trying to undermine the program. Looking for any excuse to call it a failure. Then we spend the next year making sure it's such an obvious success that they have no ammunition." "We." Grant met her eyes. "If you'll have me. As a partner. Not a savior, not a solution. Just someone who shows up. Someone who sees what you're building and wants to help build it with you." Naomi studied him for a long moment. Then she extended her hand. "Partners," she agreed. They shook on it, standing in a school parking lot under fluorescent lights, two people from different worlds who'd found common purpose in the radical act of seeing others fully. Isabella bounded over, still glowing. "Miss Carter. Mr. Morrison. We won." "You won," Naomi corrected. "Your speech, your courage, that's what changed minds tonight." "Our courage," Isabella insisted. "All of us together." She looked between them. "This is just the beginning, right? There's so much more we can do. So many more students who need to know they matter." Grant felt something unlock in his chest, the recognition that this 14-year-old girl had articulated what he'd been searching for his entire adult life. Purpose that extended beyond profit, impact that measured in transformed lives rather than quarterly earnings. "You're absolutely right," he said. "This is just the beginning." 6 months later. November arrived in Asheville with the particular beauty of mountains in autumn, leaves like fire against blue sky, air crisp enough to remind you that winter was coming but not so cold that you couldn't still sit outside and watch the world transform. Grant Morrison sat on a bench outside Jefferson High's gymnasium, watching students file in for the afternoon adaptive movement class that had become one of the school's most popular electives. Not just students with disabilities, but athletes looking to prevent injuries, dancers wanting to expand their range, kids who'd simply heard it was the class where Miss Carter taught you that your body was capable of more than you thought. The Inclusive Excellence program had survived its first full semester and was thriving. The quarterly report Grant had helped William Chen prepare showed improvements across every metric they'd chosen to measure. But more than that, it showed something harder to quantify, a shift in school culture. Students who would have been invisible 6 months ago were now integrated into clubs, sports teams, social groups. Teachers who'd initially resisted the training were now some of its strongest advocates, discovering that teaching for inclusion made them better educators for everyone. Thompson, Richards, and Martinez had gone quiet after the board vote. Not silent, they'd made a few more attempts to find fault with the program, to document problems that didn't exist, but increasingly isolated. When your weapons are coded language and manufactured outrage, it's hard to maintain momentum against visible, measurable success. Grant's phone buzzed. A text from Naomi, "You coming in or just lurking outside like a creeper?" He smiled, stood, and headed toward the gym entrance. Inside, the space had been transformed. New equipment lined one wall, adaptive bikes, resistance bands, specialized weights. Mirrors had been installed at multiple heights. The harsh fluorescent lights had been replaced with softer, adjustable LED panels that could create different moods for different activities. But the real transformation was the students. 23 of them today, ranging from freshmen to seniors, moving through warm-up stretches with Naomi leading from the front. Isabella was there, of course, but she wasn't the only one. Grant recognized Marcus. No, wait, wrong name. He recognized Tyler, a junior with cerebral palsy who moved with braces on both legs. Keisha, a senior who was deaf and followed Naomi's signed instructions with perfect precision. James, a sophomore with anxiety disorder who'd found that structured movement helped him manage his symptoms better than any medication. And then there were the students without visible disabilities. Athletes. Dancers. Kids who were just curious. All of them moving together. No one labeled, no one othered. Naomi caught his eye, smiled, and continued teaching. Grant found a spot on the bleachers, not the bottom left corner where Isabella had sat invisible 6 months ago, but higher up, with William Chen, who was taking notes for the quarterly report. Impressive, isn't it? William said quietly. It's revolutionary, Grant corrected. In the quietest possible way. They watched as Naomi transitioned the class into partner work, students pairing up to work through adaptive choreography exercises. Isabella partnered with a girl from the dance team, Thompson's daughter Emma, who'd surprised everyone by joining the class in September. The two of them moved through a sequence that required trust and communication, Emma learning to follow Isabella's lead, to adapt to her partner's needs rather than expecting her partner to adapt to hers. That's the real magic, William said, nodding toward them. Not that we're teaching disabled students how to navigate an abled world. We're teaching all students how to navigate a diverse world. How to see each other, how to adapt, how to be human together. Grant pulled out his tablet, made a note. I want to capture that for the annual report. That exact phrase, teaching students how to be human together. You're taking this pretty seriously, William observed. The documentation, the metrics, the reporting. Most donors write the check and disappear. I'm not most donors. No, William agreed. You're not. Can I ask you something personal? Grant nodded. What are you getting out of this? Really? I've seen your financials. The foundation could be funding 100 different programs. You could be hands-off, delegating to staff, living your billionaire life. Instead, you're here every week, sitting on bleachers, watching high school gym classes. Why? Grant was quiet for a moment, watching Naomi demonstrate a lift technique that allowed Isabella and Emma to create the visual effect of traditional dance while respecting Isabella's physical realities. When I was 13, he said finally, I thought my life was over. A misdiagnosis convinced me I was dying, that everything I'd hoped for was impossible. And a teacher, one teacher, refused to accept that narrative. He saw possibility where I saw endings. He taught me that limitation and death aren't the same thing. He paused, then continued. I spent the next 30 years proving I wasn't limited. Building a company, making money, accumulating success like armor against that terrified kid I used to be. And I thought I was happy. I thought I'd won. But you hadn't, William said softly. I'd survived. That's not the same as living. Grant gestured toward the gymnasium floor. That night at prom, watching Naomi dance with Isabella, I remembered what living actually looks like. It looks like seeing people. Like refusing to let anyone be invisible. Like building something that matters more than your own ego or bank account. William smiled. So, this is your redemption arc. More like my growing up arc. Grant returned the smile. Turns out 47 isn't too late to figure out what you want to be when you grow up. The class ended with a cool down. Students sprawled across the gym floor in various states of exhaustion and contentment. Naomi dismissed them with reminders about the winter showcase auditions, then made her way over to the bleachers. Mr. Chen. Mr. Morrison. She was slightly breathless, her face glowing with exertion. To what do I owe the honor of your observation? Just checking in, Grant said. Making sure our investment is paying off. Your investment, Naomi corrected, is currently sprawled across my gym floor complaining about sore muscles. I'd say it's paying off beautifully. William laughed. I need to head out, conference call with some consultants in California. Grant, I'll send you the preliminary data for the report tonight. After he left, Naomi sat down beside Grant, and they watched the students gather their belongings and file out, their chatter and laughter echoing off the gymnasium walls. Isabella got early acceptance to Davidson, Naomi said quietly. Full scholarship. She's planning to major in dance therapy. Grant felt his throat tighten. That's incredible. She wants to be like Mr. Lawson. Like me. Someone who sees the invisible kids. Naomi turned to face him. You did that. Your program made that possible. We did that, Grant corrected. And it's not my program. It never was. No, Naomi agreed. It's ours. All of us. That's what makes it work. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Naomi said, I got a call yesterday. From a school district in Charlotte. They heard about what we're doing here, and they want to replicate it. 3 schools, full implementation. They want me to consult. That's fantastic. Are you going to do it? I don't know. Naomi's voice was thoughtful. It would mean travel, time away from Jefferson, stepping into a bigger role. Part of me wants to stay right here, keep teaching, keep working with these students I know and love. And the other part? The other part remembers that there are thousands of Isabellas out there. Students sitting on metaphorical bleachers, trying to disappear, waiting for someone to see them. She looked at him. How do you decide between the specific good you can do right here and the broader good you might do somewhere else? Grant thought about his own journey, the decades spent building one company, the wealth he'd accumulated, the narrow definition of success he'd chased. And then he thought about the past 6 months, the gymnasium classes, the board meetings, the quiet satisfaction of watching students discover their own strength. I think, he said slowly, you do both. You don't abandon what you've built here, but you let it expand. You train other teachers, share what you've learned, create a model that can be replicated. You become the tide that lifts all the boats instead of just one boat you're personally rowing. Is that what you're doing? Naomi asked. With Morrison Technology Solutions. Grant had been waiting for this question. I'm stepping down as CEO. Promoting my COO to take over day-to-day operations. I'm keeping my board seat, but I'm transitioning the Morrison Foundation from a side project to my primary focus. Naomi's eyes widened. Grant, that's long overdue, he finished. I built a successful company. Good for me. Now I want to build something that actually matters. Something that changes lives instead of just accumulating capital. The company changes lives. It employs thousands of people. It does. And it will continue to do that without me micromanaging every decision. Grant smiled. You taught me something, Naomi. You taught me that seeing people isn't a side project. It's not something you do with your spare time and extra money. It's the whole point. And I want to spend whatever years I have left doing it full time. Naomi was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I'll consult for Charlotte. On one condition, you co-lead the implementation with me. Not as the money guy. As a partner. Someone who understands what we're building and why it matters. Grant extended his hand. Partners. They shook, the gesture now familiar, weighted with 6 months of collaboration and trust. I need to lock up, Naomi said, standing. But there's something I want to show you first. She led him to her office, pulled out a folder from her desk drawer. Inside were letters, dozens of them, handwritten on notebook paper, typed on school computers, scrawled on the backs of homework assignments. These are from students, Naomi explained. Students in the program, students who take my classes, students who just wanted to say thank you. I've been collecting them since September. Grant pulled one out at random, read it aloud. Dear Miss Carter, before your class I thought I was just the autistic kid. Now I know I'm James, and I'm funny, and I'm good at poetry, and I'm also autistic. Thank you for teaching me that and doesn't replace who I am. It's just part of who I am. Your student, James. Another letter, this one in purple gel pen. Miss Carter, my mom cried when I told her I made the dance team. She said she never thought I'd be able to do normal high school stuff because of my leg. But you taught me that normal is whatever I make it. I'm going to keep dancing forever. Love, Isabella. Grant read through letter after letter, each one a testament to lives changed, to students who'd been seen and had learned to see themselves differently. This is your real quarterly report, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. These letters. These stories. This is what we're building. This is what you helped build, Naomi corrected. Don't sell yourself short, Grant. You could have just written a check and walked away. Instead, you stayed. You showed up. You witnessed. That matters. I need to show you something too, Grant said. He pulled out his phone, navigated to a folder of photos. I've been documenting the program. Not for reports or presentations, just to remember. He scrolled through images. Isabella mid-dance, her face transformed by joy. Tyler using the adaptive bike, his expression fierce with concentration. Keisha and her partner communicating in sign language during a choreography session. Emma Thompson and Isabella laughing together during cool-down. Naomi demonstrating a lift, her hands gentle and sure as she guided a nervous student. And then, at the end, a selfie, Grant and Naomi with Isabella and 20 other students, all of them grinning at the camera, sweaty and exhausted and radiantly happy after the first successful adaptive movement showcase in October. "That's my favorite," Grant said, pointing at the photo. "Because everyone in that picture knows they belong. No one's invisible. No one's hidden. Everyone's exactly where they're supposed to be." Naomi smiled. "Send that to me. I want to print it, put it up in here. So when I have hard days, I can remember what we're fighting for." Already sent. They locked up the office together, walked out through the gymnasium one more time. The space was empty now, quiet, just a high school gym with good equipment and adjustable lighting. But Grant knew better. This wasn't just a room. It was a proving ground. A place where students came to discover that their limitations didn't define them, that their differences made them stronger, that they deserved to take up space in the world. In the parking lot, they lingered beside their cars, Grant's Tesla and Naomi's Honda, parked side by side like an unlikely friendship. "Thank you," Grant said, "for letting me be part of this. For teaching me what actually matters." "Thank you for showing up," Naomi replied. "For staying. For being the kind of wealthy person who uses his privilege to amplify voices instead of drowning them out." "I'm still learning." "We all are." Naomi smiled. "That's the point, isn't it? We're all still learning how to see each other, how to make space, how to be human together." Grant thought about the boy he'd been, sitting on a bleacher convinced his life was over. He thought about the man he'd become, building empires to prove his worth. And he thought about who he was now, still learning, still growing, finally understanding that success wasn't something you accumulated. It was something you gave away. "Same time next week?" he asked. "Same time next week," Naomi confirmed. "We've got Charlotte consultations to plan, quarterly reports to finalize, and about 100 students who need to know they matter." Sounds perfect. 3 years later, the Morrison Carter Institute for Inclusive Excellence occupied the top 3 floors of a renovated building in downtown Asheville, with views of the mountains and enough space for classrooms, offices, and a full adaptive movement studio. The name had been Naomi's idea. "We built this together, it should have both our names," and Grant hadn't argued, though he'd initially thought his name should be in smaller font. Today, the conference room was packed with educators from 17 school districts across 6 states, all of them here to learn about implementing inclusive education programs. Naomi stood at the front, presenting with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times, her natural teaching ability translating seamlessly to adult education. Grant watched from the back, taking notes not because he needed them but because old habits died hard. Beside him sat Isabella Torres, now a senior at Davidson College and the Institute's youngest paid consultant. She'd been working with them for 2 years, sharing her story at trainings, helping develop curriculum, reminding everyone that the students' voices had to be centered in any program that claimed to serve them. "She's brilliant," Isabella whispered, nodding toward Naomi. "I mean, I knew that, but watching her teach teachers? It's like watching an artist." "She learned from the best," Grant replied, and Isabella grinned. "Damn right she did." The training broke for lunch, and the educators scattered to the catering tables. Grant and Isabella made their way to Naomi, who was fielding questions from a particularly enthusiastic principal from Tennessee. "Miss Carter." The principal, a white woman in her 50s with kind eyes, was practically bouncing. "This is exactly what our district needs. We have students falling through the cracks every day, and we just don't have the resources or knowledge to." "You have more resources than you think," Naomi interrupted gently. "The biggest resource isn't money or equipment. It's commitment. Are you committed to seeing all your students? Really seeing them?" The principal's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "I think so, but..." "There's no but," Naomi said, her voice firm but kind. "Either you're committed to inclusion, which means it's going to be hard and uncomfortable and you're going to make mistakes and you're going to do it anyway, or you're not, in which case don't waste your district's money on our training. This only works if you mean it." The principal was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You're right. And yes. I mean it. Our students deserve better than what we're giving them." "Then let's figure out how to give it to them," Naomi said, and her smile returned, warm and encouraging. After the principal left, Isabella hugged Naomi from behind. "You're still my favorite teacher." "I'm not your teacher anymore. You graduated." "You'll always be my teacher," Isabella insisted. Teachers don't expire just because you leave their classroom. Grant cleared his throat. Before the afternoon session starts, I have something for both of you. He pulled out his tablet, called up a video file. This arrived this morning. From Jefferson High. He pressed play. The video was clearly student-produced, shot on smartphones and edited with consumer software. But the content was professional grade. It showed the Jefferson High gymnasium, their gymnasium, where it had all started, but transformed almost beyond recognition. The adaptive equipment had been upgraded again. The walls were covered in photos of current and former students, a visual testament to 3 years of inclusive education. And then the video cut to students. Tyler, now a senior, talking about how the program had given him confidence to try for student government, which he'd won. Keisha, graduated and attending Gallaudet University, signing her gratitude for a program that had celebrated her deafness instead of treating it as a deficit. Emma Thompson, now a freshman at Juilliard, describing how adaptive movement had made her a better dancer by teaching her that technique without empathy was just gymnastics. And then, at the end, Principal Henderson appeared on screen. 3 years ago, he said, 2 people walked into my school and challenged everything I thought I knew about education. They asked me, what if inclusion wasn't charity, but excellence? What if seeing every student wasn't special treatment, but basic human decency? What if we stopped asking how students could adapt to our schools, and started asking how our schools could adapt to students? He paused, and there were tears in his eyes. I'm ashamed to say I resisted at first. I worried about cost and logistics and what the parents would think. But Miss Carter and Mr. Morrison didn't give up. They showed us what was possible. And now, 3 years later, Jefferson High is a model for inclusive education. Districts from across the country visit us to see what we've built. And more importantly, much more importantly, our students know they belong. The video ended with a montage of students from the past 3 years, all of them moving, dancing, laughing, learning together. The final frame was text. Thank you, Miss Carter and Mr. Morrison, for teaching us how to see. With gratitude, Jefferson High School. Grant watched Naomi's face as the video played. Watched tears stream down her cheeks, watched Isabella grip her hand, watched the weight of 3 years of work, struggle, and triumph wash over her. When the video ended, she turned to him, speechless. You changed their lives, Grant said simply. You changed my life. You taught all of us that being seen is the most basic human need, and that meeting that need is the most important work any of us can do. Naomi wiped her eyes, laughed shakily. I can't believe Henderson actually admitted he was wrong. Character growth, Isabella said solemnly. It's not just for students. The afternoon training session was powerful in the way that meaningful work always is, not flashy or dramatic, but grounded in purpose and human connection. Grant watched Naomi teach 17 educators how to see their students fully, how to build programs that celebrated diversity instead of merely accommodating it, how to understand that inclusion wasn't a destination but a daily practice. And he watched Isabella share her story, not as a victim or inspiration porn, but as a young woman who'd learned that her worth wasn't contingent on her abilities, that her life had value simply because she was human, that the world was better when everyone got to show up fully as themselves. At the end of the day, as the educators filed out with training materials and new email contacts and the first fragile seeds of possibility, Grant found himself alone in the conference room with Naomi and Isabella. Another successful training, he said. Another 17 districts that might actually get it right, Naomi corrected. If they commit. If they do the work. They will, Isabella said with the confidence of youth. Because we're not giving them a choice. We're creating a world where inclusion is the expectation, not the exception. And eventually, everyone will have to adapt. Grant smiled at that, at this brilliant young woman who transformed from invisible to unstoppable in 3 years. You're going to change the world, Isabella. We already are, she replied, gesturing to encompass the 3 of them, the Institute, the growing network of educators and students and advocates who joined their movement. Every single day, we're changing it. One student at a time. One classroom at a time. One person learning to really see another person. She was right, Grant realized. They were changing the world. Not through dramatic gestures or viral moments, but through the persistent, unglamorous work of showing up and refusing to let anyone be invisible. His phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer, his former assistant who now ran the Morrison Foundation's operations, just got confirmation. 15 more districts requesting trainings for next quarter. We're going to need to hire 3 more trainers. Grant showed the text to Naomi, who whistled softly. This is growing faster than we anticipated. Because it works, Grant said. Because teachers are desperate for frameworks that actually help their students. Because students are desperate to be seen. So we scale up, Isabella said decisively. We train more trainers, develop more resources, reach more schools. We make this the standard instead of the exception. Naomi and Grant exchanged a glance, the kind of wordless communication that came from 3 years of partnership. We scale up, Naomi agreed. 5 years later, the National Education Conference took place in Washington, D.C., in a massive convention center that held 10,000 educators from across the country. Grant Morrison stood backstage at the main auditorium, watching through a gap in the curtains as the space filled to capacity. Nervous? William Chen asked beside him. Terrified, Grant admitted. I'm a tech guy. Public speaking to investors is one thing. Public speaking to 10,000 teachers is something else entirely. You'll be fine. Just tell the truth. That's all they want to hear. The truth. Grant thought about that as he waited for his introduction. What was the truth of the past 5 years? The truth was that the Morrison Carter Institute had trained educators in 847 schools across 34 states. That inclusive education was slowly becoming standard practice instead of experimental program. That students like Isabella were no longer anomalies but expected, welcomed, celebrated members of their school communities. The truth was also that the work was hard. That resistance hadn't disappeared, it had just gotten more sophisticated. That Thompson-style opposition had evolved into legislative efforts to defund inclusive programs, budget cuts disguised as fiscal responsibility, culture war rhetoric about lowering standards and social engineering. But the other truth, the one that mattered most, was that none of it had stopped them. Because once you'd seen what was possible, once you'd watched students transform from invisible to visible, you couldn't unsee it. Couldn't go back to the way things were. Ladies and gentlemen, the conference organizer's voice boomed through the auditorium. Please welcome Grant Morrison, co-founder of the Morrison Carter Institute for Inclusive Excellence. Grant walked onto the stage to applause that felt generous given that most of these educators probably had no idea who he was. The lights were bright, the audience a sea of faces, the moment surreal in its magnitude. He'd prepared remarks. Had them on the teleprompter, carefully crafted by his communications team to hit all the right notes. But standing there, looking out at 10,000 teachers who showed up every day to see students, he abandoned the script. 8 years ago, Grant began, I went to a high school prom because I'd sponsored it. I didn't want to be there. I was uncomfortable, out of place, a middle-aged tech guy at a teenage dance. But I'd made a commitment, so I showed up. He paused, letting the simplicity of that sink in. And I watched something extraordinary. I watched a teacher named Naomi Carter walk across a dance floor, extend her hand to a student everyone else had learned not to see, and refuse to let that student be invisible. It was the most radical act I've ever witnessed. And it changed my life. The audience was quiet now, attentive in a different way. I'd spent 30 years building a tech company. I was successful by every conventional metric, wealthy, influential, respected in my field. But watching Naomi dance with Isabella Torres, I realized I'd been building the wrong thing. Or rather, I'd been building a foundation without knowing what I wanted to put on top of it. Grant looked out at the educators, these people who'd chosen profession that paid too little and asked too much, who showed up every day to see students most of the world overlooked. You already know what I learned that night. You live it every day. You know that seeing students, really seeing them, in all their complexity and humanity, is the most important work any of us can do. You know that inclusion isn't charity or accommodation, it's excellence. You know that every student deserves to feel like they belong, not because they've earned it, but because they're human. He felt emotion rising in his throat, let it come instead of fighting it. 8 years ago, I was a tech billionaire who thought success meant accumulation. Today, I'm a former tech billionaire who knows success means distribution, distributing resources, opportunity, dignity, the simple radical gift of being seen. And I have Naomi Carter to thank for that. I have Isabella Torres to thank. I have every educator in this room to thank, because you do this work every single day without recognition or adequate compensation or even basic respect from a society that claims to value education but consistently undervalues educators. The applause started then, building from a few people to a wave to a thunderous standing ovation. Grant waited for it to subside. The Morrison Carter Institute exists because Naomi Carter refused to let one student be invisible. It's grown because thousands of educators like you have made the same choice in your own classrooms, with your own students. You've chosen to see, to adapt, to build school communities where everyone belongs. He gestured to the side of the stage, where Naomi was waiting in the wings. I'm not the person who should be giving this keynote. She is. So, if you'll indulge me. Naomi walked onto the stage, surprised but composed, and the applause somehow grew louder. She joined Grant at the podium, and he stepped back, giving her the spotlight she'd always deserved. Thank you, Grant, for that unnecessarily generous introduction, Naomi said, her voice warm and slightly amused. And thank you all for the work you do every single day. For seeing students. For refusing to let anyone be invisible. For understanding that education isn't about filling vessels, it's about lighting fires. She spoke for 20 minutes. No notes, no script, just truth distilled from 8 years of building something that mattered. She talked about Isabella, about the other students whose lives had been transformed by inclusive education. She talked about the challenges, the resistance, the exhausting work of changing systems designed to exclude. And then she said something that made Grant's chest tighten. A lot of people want to make this story about me and Grant. The teacher and the billionaire who teamed up to change education. It's a good story, there's even a movie producer who's been calling. She smiled at the laughter that generated. But that's not the real story. The real story is about every single educator in this room who's made the choice, the daily, difficult, often thankless choice, to see your students. Not as problems to solve or challenges to manage, but as human beings deserving of dignity, belonging, and the chance to thrive. She paused, her eyes scanning the audience. You're the ones changing the world. One student at a time. One classroom at a time. One radical act of witness at a time. Grant and I just built a framework. You're the ones doing the actual work. And we see you. We witness you. We honor you. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. Grant stood beside Naomi, watching 10,000 educators celebrate each other, and felt something he'd been chasing his entire adult life: purpose. Not success. Not achievement. Purpose. After the keynote, they were mobbed by educators wanting to share their stories, ask questions, connect. Grant stepped back, let Naomi handle the crowd. This was her element, her calling. He watched her light up as teacher after teacher described their own inclusive programs, their own Isabella moments, their own experiences of watching students transform from invisible to visible. Eventually, the crowd thinned. Naomi found him near the exhibition hall, where the Morrison Carter Institute had a booth staffed by William Chen and 3 trainers they'd hired over the years. That was something, Grant said. That was everything, Naomi corrected. Did you hear those stories? There are hundreds of schools now, Grant. Hundreds. All because you showed up to a prom you didn't want to attend. All because you danced with a girl everyone else ignored. They stood together, watching the conference flow around them, educators networking, learning, sharing the particular passion of people who'd chosen to spend their lives in service of others' growth. I got an email yesterday, Naomi said quietly. From the MacArthur Foundation. They're considering me for a genius grant. Grant turned to stare at her. Naomi, that's incredible. It's premature. They consider hundreds of people. But she was smiling, allowing herself a moment of pride. But Grant, if I got it, the recognition, the funding, we could scale even faster. Reach even more schools. When you get it, Grant corrected. Not if. When. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted. What? Naomi asked. It's Isabella. She just defended her master's thesis at Davidson. Dance therapy, focused on inclusive movement practices. He showed Naomi the photo Isabella had sent, her in graduation regalia, holding her thesis, surrounded by her committee members, her smile blazing with achievement. That's our girl, Naomi whispered. Look at what she became. Look at what she always was, Grant corrected. We just helped her see it. 10 years later, Jefferson High School had changed dramatically in a decade. The gymnasium where it had all started now had a plaque near the entrance, the Carter Morrison Center for Inclusive Education, where every student belongs. Grant Morrison, now 57 and almost entirely gray, stood looking at that plaque with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. He'd stepped down from all his corporate roles 5 years ago, dedicating himself full-time to the foundation that bore his and Naomi's names. The Morrison Carter Institute now operated in all 50 states, had trained over 50,000 educators, had touched the lives of hundreds of thousands of students. But this gymnasium, this school, this is where it had started. And tonight, they were back for a very specific reason. The Spring Showcase. 10 years later, the auditorium was packed. Current students, former students, parents, community members who'd been part of the journey. Grant sat in the middle section, same spot he'd claimed that first night a decade ago. Beside him sat Isabella Torres, now Dr. Isabella Torres, with her own practice in adaptive dance therapy and a faculty position at Davidson. "I can't believe it's been 10 years, Isabella said softly. "I can't believe you're Dr. Torres," Grant replied. "When did you get so accomplished?" "I had good teachers." She squeezed his hand. "The best teachers." The lights dimmed. Principal Henderson, somehow still in the job, though grayer and slower, took the stage. "Welcome to Jefferson High's Spring Showcase," he began. "Tonight is special for many reasons, but most importantly because 10 years ago on this very stage, two people showed our community what inclusion actually looks like. They taught us that different isn't less. That adaptation isn't weakness. That everyone deserves to be seen." He gestured to the wings. "Please welcome, for one night only, the performance that started it all, Naomi Carter and Isabella Torres." The audience exploded. Grant found himself on his feet before his brain caught up, clapping until his palms stung. Naomi walked onto the stage, and Grant's breath caught. She was 38 now, more confident, more assured, but still with that same grace he'd fallen in love with. Yes, he could admit it now, even if only to himself, 10 years ago. Isabella joined her, walking with a barely perceptible limp. The brace was long gone, replaced by physical therapy and surgery and sheer stubborn determination. But Grant knew she still felt it sometimes, the memory of being the girl who couldn't. The music started. The same piece they danced to a decade ago, that hauntingly beautiful piano melody that felt like rain and memory and hope. And they danced. It was different now. Isabella moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent a decade mastering her body's new realities. Naomi moved with the wisdom of someone who'd spent a decade teaching others how to see. Together, they created something that transcended the choreography, a conversation in movement about growth, transformation, the long journey from invisible to visible. The audience was silent, transfixed. Grant watched with tears streaming down his face, remembering the terrified 14-year-old and the patient teacher, seeing now the accomplished doctor and the MacArthur genius who changed American education. The song ended. Naomi and Isabella struck their final pose, both reaching upward toward the light. The applause was deafening. But then something unexpected happened. Students began standing up throughout the auditorium. Current students, dozens of them, all wearing t-shirts that said "I am seen" in bold letters. They made their way to the stage, forming a circle around Naomi and Isabella. And they began to dance. Each student moved in their own way, some with braces, some with wheelchairs, some with no visible difference at all. They danced together, a living testament to 10 years of inclusive education, 10 years of refusing to let anyone be invisible. Grant couldn't see through his tears anymore. Beside him, Dr. Torres was sobbing openly, her hand gripping his. When the impromptu performance ended, the entire auditorium rose as one. The applause went on and on, wave after wave of sound that filled the auditorium and seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Grant stood, clapping until his hands ached, watching as Naomi and Isabella were surrounded by the circle of students, their legacy, their impact made visible and undeniable. Principal Henderson returned to the stage, his voice thick with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you just witnessed is the result of 10 years of commitment. 10 years of one teacher refusing to let one student be invisible. 10 years of that choice rippling outward, transforming our entire school culture." He gestured to Naomi and Isabella. These two women didn't just change Jefferson High. They changed how we think about education, about belonging, about what it means to see each other fully. And tonight, we want to honor that. Henderson pulled out a framed certificate. By unanimous vote of the school board, yes, unanimous, including some former skeptics who've since seen the light, we are officially renaming our adaptive education program. From this day forward, it will be known as the Torres-Carter Program for Inclusive Excellence. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth. Naomi's eyes went wide with surprise. Dr. Torres, you were the first student. You showed us what courage looks like. Miss Carter, you were the teacher who refused to look away. Your names will be forever connected to this place, to this work, to every student who walks through these doors and learns that they belong. The audience erupted again. Grant watched Naomi and Isabella embrace on stage, both crying, both laughing, both radiating the particular joy that comes from seeing your life's work recognized and honored. After the showcase ended, after the crowd had thinned and the auditorium had emptied, Grant found himself back in the gymnasium. Just him, Naomi, and Isabella, standing in the space where it had all begun. Do you remember? Isabella asked, pointing to the bottom bleacher on the left side. That's where I was sitting, trying to disappear. I remember, Naomi said softly. I saw you the moment I walked in. Couldn't not see you. That was my superpower, Isabella said with a small smile. Being invisible. Until you decided I didn't get to be invisible anymore. Grant walked over to the bleachers, sat down in that exact spot. Can I tell you both something? Something I've never told anyone. They joined him, flanking him on either side. The day I came for the check presentation, before I met either of you, I saw Isabella sitting right here. And I had a panic attack. He said it simply, the truth he'd carried for 10 years. Because I saw myself. The 13-year-old me, sitting in this exact spot, convinced his life was over. And I wanted to run. To get out of here before the memories consumed me. But you stayed, Naomi said quietly. I stayed. And 3 weeks later, I watched you dance with her, and I understood something. The boy I'd been, sitting on this bleacher, he wasn't dead. He wasn't even healed. He was just waiting. Waiting for someone to show him that being seen was possible. That mattering was possible. That life could be bigger than fear. He turned to look at Isabella. You saved me, Dr. Torres. Not the other way around. You reminded me why I'd survived. You gave purpose to all those years of building something I didn't even know I was building for. Isabella leaned her head on his shoulder. We saved each other, then. All three of us. That's how it works, right? Naomi said, looking around the gymnasium that had become sacred ground. We don't save people. We see them. We witness them. We refuse to let them disappear. And in doing that, we save ourselves. They sat in comfortable silence, three people whose lives had intersected in this space, whose choice to see each other had created ripples that had transformed thousands of lives. Finally, Isabella spoke. I got a call last week. From the White House. Grant and Naomi turned to stare at her. They want me to be part of a national task force on inclusive education. Advisory role, working with the Department of Education to develop federal guidelines. She paused. They said my work exemplifies the future of American education. Can you believe that? Me. The girl who couldn't walk properly. The girl everyone learned not to see. I believe it, Grant said firmly. I've always believed it. So have I, Naomi added. From the moment I saw you trying to disappear on that bleacher, I knew you were going to change the world. You just needed someone to believe it loudly enough that you could hear it over your own fear. Isabella wiped her eyes. I'm going to take the position. But only if you both agree to be part of my advisory team. I need you. The task force needs you. The country needs what we've built here. Grant looked at Naomi. Another wordless conversation, honed over a decade of partnership. We're in, they said simultaneously, and all three of them laughed. Of course we're in, Naomi continued. This is bigger than Jefferson High now. Bigger than North Carolina. If we have a chance to influence national policy, to make inclusive education the standard instead of the exception. Then we take it, Grant finished. We take it, and we do the same thing we've always done. We show up. We see people. We refuse to let anyone be invisible. Isabella pulled them both into a hug, fierce and grateful. 10 years ago, I was sitting on this bleacher thinking my life was over. Now I'm going to help shape education policy for the entire country. How did this happen? You happened, Naomi said. You chose to be brave. You chose to show up to prom even though you were terrified. You chose to keep dancing even when it hurt. You chose to believe that your life had value beyond your limitations. We all chose, Grant added. That's the secret, isn't it? Every day, we choose. To see or to look away. To build or to destroy. To make space or to close doors. And every choice creates ripples. They stood, the three of them, and looked around the gymnasium one last time. At the Torres Carter Center for Inclusive Excellence plaque. At the adaptive equipment lining the walls. At the photos of hundreds of students who'd passed through this space and learned that they belonged. I need to lock up, Naomi said finally. But there's one more thing. She walked to her office, returned with a small box. Inside were 3 bracelets, simple silver bands with an inscription, I see you. I witness you. I refuse to let you disappear. I had these made for tonight, Naomi explained. For the 3 of us. To remember this journey. To remember that we're not done. That as long as there are students sitting on metaphorical bleachers, trying to be invisible, we have work to do. They put on the bracelets, Isabella, Naomi, Grant, 3 people from different worlds, united by the radical belief that everyone deserves to be seen. To the next 10 years, Isabella said, raising an imaginary glass. To seeing people, Naomi added. To refusing to let anyone be invisible, Grant finished. They locked up the gymnasium together and walked out into the spring night. The mountains surrounded Asheville like her embrace, the stars scattered across the sky like possibilities, the air sweet with honeysuckle and hope. Behind them, Jefferson High stood quiet and dark, waiting for Monday morning when students would return and the work would continue. The daily, unglamorous, absolutely essential work of seeing each other, of making space, of refusing to let anyone disappear. Grant Morrison had spent 30 years building a tech empire. He'd accumulated wealth, influence, success by every conventional metric. But his real fortune, he understood now, wasn't in any bank account. His real fortune was walking beside him, a MacArthur genius who'd taught him what mattered, and a young woman who'd reminded him why he'd survived. His fortune was the thousands of students whose lives had been transformed by their work. His fortune was the knowledge that he'd spent the second half of his life building something that actually mattered. As they reached the parking lot, Isabella's phone buzzed. She checked it, then laughed with pure delight. It's from Emma Thompson. You remember, the dance team captain whose mother tried to shut down the program. How could we forget? Naomi said dryly. She just got a job teaching adaptive dance at Juilliard. And she credits our program for changing her perspective, for teaching her that dance isn't about perfection, it's about expression. Isabella showed them the text, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it. You taught me how to really see. How to really dance. How to really teach. Grant felt something settle in his chest, satisfaction. Yes, but more than that. Completion. The circle closing, the story finding its resolution, the proof that transformation was possible even for the Thompsons of the world. Sometimes, he said quietly, the people who fight hardest against change are the ones who need it most. They're just scared. Scared that if the world expands to include everyone, they'll somehow have less. But the opposite is true, Naomi said. When we make space for everyone, we all have more. More connection. More humanity. More possibility. More dancing, Isabella added with a grin. They stood in the parking lot for a few more minutes, none of them quite ready to leave, all of them knowing that this night, 10 years after the birthday party that changed everything, was another turning point. Another beginning. Same time next week. Grant asked, the question that had become their ritual. Same time next week, Naomi confirmed. We've got a country to transform. Piece of cake, Isabella said. We've already transformed a school, a district, a state. What's a whole country? Just another challenge, Grant replied. Just another chance to see people. To witness them. To refuse to let them disappear. They got into their cars. Grant's Tesla was now an electric SUV, practical instead of flashy. Naomi's Honda had been upgraded but was still modest. Isabella drove a adapted van decorated with bumper stickers about inclusive education and prepared to drive to their separate homes. But Grant sat in his car for a long moment, not starting the engine, just thinking about the journey. About the boy on the bleacher. About the teacher who'd saved him. About Mr. Lawson, wherever he was, who'd started the chain of seeing that had led to this moment. He pulled out his phone and did something he'd been meaning to do for years. He searched for Mr. Lawson, his old adaptive PE teacher. Found him on Facebook, still teaching, now in Florida, now 68 years old and still changing lives. Grant typed a message. Mr. Lawson, I don't know if you remember me. Grant Morrison, Jefferson High, 1990. You taught me adaptive PE when I thought my life was over. You showed me that strong came in different forms. I want you to know that I've spent the past decade trying to be for other students what you were for me. And it's the best work I've ever done. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Thank you for refusing to let me be invisible. You changed my life. And through me, you've changed thousands of others. With endless gratitude, Grant. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The response came 3 minutes later. Grant. Of course I remember you. You were the boy who thought he was dying but learned to swim. I'm so proud of what you've built. And I'm not surprised. You always had a gift for seeing people. You just needed someone to see you first. Keep doing the work. The world needs it. With love, Tom Lawson. Grant sat in his car, reading and rereading that message, feeling the circle complete in a way he hadn't expected. The boy on the bleacher, seen by a teacher. Growing up to become the man who helped another teacher see another student. Who helped that student become someone who would now influence national policy. This was the ripple effect of witness. This was what happened when you refused to let people be invisible. His phone rang. Naomi. You, okay? She asked. I saw you sitting in your car. I'm perfect, Grant said, and meant it. Just thinking about ripples. About how one choice can change everything. The choice to dance, Naomi said. The choice to see, Grant corrected. Same thing, maybe. Yeah, Grant agreed, looking back at the gymnasium one last time. Same thing. He started his car and drove toward his future, toward the task force, toward the national work, toward the next chapter of refusing to let anyone be invisible. Behind him, Jefferson High's gymnasium lights finally went dark. But the work they'd started there would never go dark. Because once you'd learned to see people, really see them, you couldn't unsee them. And once you decided that everyone deserved to belong, you couldn't decide it. You just kept dancing. You just kept witnessing. You just kept showing up, day after day, choice after choice, refusing to let anyone be invisible. And slowly, gradually, one classroom at a time, one student at a time, one radical act of witness at a time, you changed the world. Grant Morrison spent 30 years building a tech empire, accumulating wealth and influence and everything society told him mattered. But it took one night at a high school prom, watching one teacher refuse to let one student be invisible, to show him what actually mattered. 10 years later, they transformed not just Jefferson High, but thousands of schools across the country. They'd proven that inclusion wasn't charity, it was excellence. That seeing people wasn't special treatment, it was basic humanity. That belonging wasn't something you had to earn, it was something you deserved simply by being human. Isabella Torres went from the invisible girl with a leg brace to Dr. Isabella Torres, shaping national education policy. Naomi Carter went from a dedicated teacher to a MacArthur genius, revolutionizing how America thinks about inclusive education. And Grant Morrison went from a tech billionaire chasing success to a philanthropist who finally understood the difference between accumulation and purpose. But the real story wasn't about any of them individually. It was about what happened when people chose to see each other. When they refused to let anyone disappear. When they understood that every person sitting on a metaphorical bleacher, trying to be invisible, deserves someone willing to cross the floor, extend a hand, and say, I see you. You matter. Let's dance. That's the power of witness. That's the revolution of seeing. That's what happens when we refuse to let anyone be invisible. If this story moved you, if it reminded you to see the people around you, share it. Because somewhere, right now, someone is sitting on a bleacher, trying to disappear, waiting for someone to see them. Be that person. Choose to witness. Refuse to let anyone be invisible. Thank you for reading. Thank you for seeing. Thank you for being part of this journey. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it, and please don't forget to subscribe.